Hey guys, tonight we begin a wonderfully gentle journey into boring history for sleep. A day in the life of a medieval Scriptorium Scribe. Imagine the hush of stone walls warmed by candlelight, the soft scratch of quills arranging letters like tiny dancers on vellum. If you truly enjoy this soothing corner of history, please like and subscribe, and in the comments share your location and local time so we can drift off in unison around the globe. Now's the moment to dim the lights, turn on a quiet fan, and settle into something plush and inviting. Let your body soften, your thoughts slow, and anticipate the calm rhythm of ink meeting parchment. We'll soon wander among monks whispering prayers and illuminating manuscripts by lamplight. The world outside quiets as we prepare to step into their tranquil routine. Now the story begins. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and focus on the tale. Soon you will drift into restful slumber. The screen now fades to darkness. Before the first glow of dawn slips above the horizon, before the rest of the monastery stirs from its deep slumber, Brother Gabriel steps across the cloister and presses his palm against the heavy oak door. The iron hinges yield a low, measured groan, as if waking from a long dream, and he eases the door inward. A whisper of cool, damp air drifts out of the scriptorium's stone threshold, carrying with it the subtle scent of moss and ancient mortar. The chamber lies dark, still, and waiting, its walls solid and unadorned save for the faint traces of chalk lines left from other days' work and the occasional smudge where a careless quill once slipped. Brother Gabriel pauses for a heartbeat, drawing in the stillness. His footsteps are muffled against the thick rush mat that leads to the center of the floor, and for a moment he stands alone in the deep hush, aware only of his own steady breathing and the faint echo of unseen drops of water gathering in the far corner. This place, he thinks, is both sanctuary and workshop, sacred ground for the careful labor of the hand, mind, and spirit. Here, the word of God is made visible through careful strokes of ink upon prepared parchment, each letter a small prayer offered in silent concentration. With practiced movements, he kneels before a low wooden chest built into the north wall. Its latch is cold beneath his fingertips as he unlatches it and lifts the lid. Within lie the tools of the day, a handful of tallow candles, a small oil lamp scribed with simple crosses, and a pocket of wood shaven for kindling. He takes 3 candles, their wax pale and firm, and arranges them, 2 upon the ledge by the east window, and 1 on the long central bench that will serve as his desk. Each is set into a ring of metal sunk into the stone to catch any melting wax. In the half-light, the candle wicks appear as dark threads, waiting to be lit. Next, he draws the little lamp from the chest, seals it shut to prevent any spillage, and carries it to the western wall. He places it carefully on a bracket fastened to the stone, leveling the lamp until it stands true and will burn straight once lit. From another compartment in the chest, he lifts a small clay jug of oil and a clay container of lampblack, finely ground so that, over time, the draftiness of the chapel and cloister has blackened even further. He pours 2 cautious spoonfuls of oil into the lamp's reservoir, then sprinkles in a small pinch of the lampblack. These 2 simple ingredients will give him a steady flame strong enough to reach through the morning gloom without choking in smoke. At last comes the moment to bring light into the room. Gabriel strikes a flint against steel, sparks dancing for an instant in the air before one finds purchase on the tinder tucked beside the oak door. The small flame, hungry and alive, he transfers to a thin taper wound around a length of rolled parchment. With that slender candle in hand, he walks the length of the hall, pausing at each of the unlit lamps set against the stone walls. He cups the candle's flame beneath the tiny glass chimney of each lamp, and one by one, in silent ritual, he breathes life into every wick. Immediately the scriptorium softens around him, awakening from its muted abyss into an amber glow that pools warmly upon rough-hewn floor and rugged wall alike. The flicker of oil light reveals the texture of the stones, walls hewn at the monastery's founding centuries ago from the same hill above the valley. Their seams, once raw and new, now bear a patina of soot and time, and here and there a patch of mold, a reminder that even sacred spaces must reckon with earth's dampness. Above, the great arches of the vaulted ceiling curve high into the gloom, lost in shadows, as if the room were an upturned ship's hull, carved from a single cavern. In the center, the long workbench stands sturdy on trestles, its surface yet cold and empty. Gabriel removes the cloth that covered it overnight, an oilskin drape meant to guard the wood from dew and dust. Beneath, he finds the granite oak smooth and unblemished. Along one side of the bench, he spaces out 3 wooden stools, their legs nicked and darkened from years of foot traffic. Each stool creaks faintly as he adjusts it, ensuring it will not rock or slip while he writes. He measures the bench's length with his fingertips, slightly over 6 cubits, and nods, pleased that it offers just enough room to lay out an exemplar text on his left, the blank parchment in front, and his inkwell to the right. On a smaller bench beneath the east window, where the earliest light may soon enter, he arranges supports for his parchments, curved wooden boards to prop up sheets of vellum, preventing them from bending or curling as they rest. Each support is carved from alder or poplar, sanded smooth where a fragile sheet might otherwise pick, and marked at the back with the initials of its usual user. He selects the support bearing his brother's initials, RG, out of habit, the curves just right for his preferred angle of writing. By now the scriptorium glows fully with flame, but the rising sun has not yet breached the thick walls. The air remains cool, almost damp, as if the very stone still holds the chill of midnight. Gabriel draws his robe tighter, smoothing the folds of wool over his chest, and takes a moment to steady his arms. He listens for the faint sounds beyond the heavy door, a distant cock crowing, perhaps, or the rustle of the prior taking his first steps down the corridor of cells. The monastery is waking too, each brother preparing for the single life of prayer and labor that defines this place. And today, Gabriel's labor is the meticulous transcription of a passage from the Psalter, each word, each letter, offering meditative space between the demands of spoken prayer and the silent devotion of the pen. Before reaching for his quill knife, he closes his eyes and breathes deeply. He feels the subtle tension of cloistered life settle around him, the sense that time expands and contracts with each flicker of flame, that 1 hour of careful copying can stretch into what feels like a lifetime, and yet, at the end of the day, the work accomplished stands as a testament to patient diligence. The door remains closed, the bench is set, the lamps alight. Dawn's first light may still be hours away, but already this chamber shines with purpose. Carefully, he eases open a small, flat box on the bench, a leather-bound case wrought by the monastery's craftsmen. Inside lies a handful of goose quills, long and pale and ready for the shaping blade. He touches one, feeling its firm shaft through calloused fingers, and nods to himself. All is prepared. The workspace is sanctified not by incense or chant, but by the quiet readiness of tools aligned for their task. Here, in the dim glow between night and dawn, Brother Gabriel will begin the day's careful miracle, transforming empty vellum into luminous text. And so, before the sun's first rays, before any sound of voices in the chapel, the scriptorium stands open and expectant, its silence uplifting, its purpose clear, its lamplit corridor awaiting the gentle scrape of quill upon parchment. In that hush, the day's work has already begun. The scribe pauses beside the heavy oak table as the first pale light of dawn seeps through the narrow windows. The air in the scriptorium feels cool on bare skin, carrying a faint tang of damp stone and beeswax. On a small shelf, nestled in a shallow wooden tray, lie the raw materials for the day's craft, goose feathers and earthenware pots of ink ingredients. The chamber is hushed, only the low flicker of candlelight stirs across the masonry, and the scribe's own measured breath breaks the stillness. Here, at the threshold between preparation and creation, each tool is tended with care. First, the scribe selects a goose feather. The feathers are thick and supple, gathered at season's end when the bird's plumage is full. Some are plucked in autumn beneath the willow-lined pond near the abbey, others sent from distant monasteries by merchants. Each feather is unique. Some boast a creamy white luster, others veer toward pewter gray. The scribe lifts one in slender fingers, inspecting the quill's firmness at the base. A proper quill must bend without splitting, yet retain a firm spine to carry ink steadily across the page. A small pot of warm water stands ready. The scribe dips the feather's shaft briefly, softening its inner pith so that the hollow core would accept ink more fluidly. Water beads on the smooth surface, and the scribe gently shakes away each droplet, moving with deliberate slowness. Inhaling the fresh, mild scent of goose down and water, the scribe turns toward the leather-bound case on the desk which holds the penknife. The blade is narrow, razor-sharp, and crafted by the monastery's resident blacksmith. With the quill held firmly in the left hand, the scribe brings the penknife to the feather's tip. The blade whispers through the keratin with a crisp, clean sound. First, the scribe clicks the very end at a slight angle, creating the preliminary slant that will mark the nib's edge. Then, with infinitely small movements, just a fraction of a millimeter, the edge is trimmed and shaped. Each shaving of feather curls away in pale ribbons. The scribe pauses often, testing the nib on a scrap of discarded parchment. A few strokes, a quick inspection. If the line appears too broad, another slice refines the edge. If too narrow, the angle is adjusted. At times, the quill feels stubborn, refusing to yield a fine point. In those moments, the scribe breathes deeply, calms the mind, and resumes the careful carving. It is more than mere carving. It is a conversation between hand, tool, and material. As each quill emerges from this ritual, it is set aside among its brethren. Rows of freshly cut nibs of varying thickness, arranged according to size. The scribe's tools now rest within easy reach, the table's surface still gleaming with minute traces of keratin and a faint echo of each carving. Next comes the ink. On a low shelf, aged oak gall nodules sit in a wooden bowl. These dark, wrinkled spheres, acorn galls formed by wasp larvae feeding on oak leaves, contain the tannic acid that yields the rich velvety black of scriptorium ink. The scribe picks up one nodule, its surface rough and slightly dusty. With the tip of the penknife, the shell is cracked open and grains of the hard interior are scooped into a small stone mortar. The scribe measures out a dark handful, noting its weight by eye. A few spoonfuls of lamp soot follow. The scribe carries a tiny metal scoop from the hearth's burnt wicks, adding velvety black carbon dust to the bowl. Finally, a little water from the lead-lined jug dribbles across the nodules and soot. The scribe lifts a wooden pestle and begins to grind, turning the mixture in slow, circular motions. Each turn crushes the nodules finer, graying the powder before it darkens again as the soot blends. The rhythmic scrape of stone on stone rings faintly in the still room, so soft it might go unheard were it not for the scribe's close focus. Gradually, the mixture thickens into a viscous paste. The scribe slips a finger to taste its consistency. No flavor, only a dry grit that hints of tannin. More water is added drop by drop until the paste yields a smooth, liquid form. The final draw of the pestle smooths out any stubborn granules. The scribe pauses, tilting the mortar to catch stray drips and swirls of ink, then lifts a length of fine linen cloth from the table. With deliberate care, the cloth is draped over the mortar's mouth and the liquid is poured through, filtering out any remaining lumps. The resulting ink settles in a small pewter dish, cool and glossy, reflecting the flickering lamplight. The scribe murmurs a soft word of gratitude to the centuries of scribes before who perfected this recipe. Ink, like quills, is as much a partner to the pen as the mind is to the hand. Too thin and the letters bleed across the parchment, too thick and the flow interrupts the rhythm of writing. This in-between darkness, this union of soot and tannin will soon become the very lines of sacred psalms and learned texts. Now the shallow inkwells are readied. Two tiny cerulean blue pots, their rims glazed in earthen sheen, sit waiting on a linen cloth. The scribe lifts one, and with a small ladle fashioned from polished horn, pours the ink inside until it rises just below the pot's neck. A gentle tilt prevents the liquid from sloshing or spilling. The other pot is filled in like manner, though one may hold slightly more for broader strokes. Each inkwell is then wiped clean at the rim with a soft rag, ensuring no drips mar the desk surface. Attention turns to the penknives and styli. These slender blades and pointed tools are placed meticulously beside the inkwells. The penknives gleam faintly under the candlelight, their edges reflecting the flicker. The stylus, a pointer for ruling lines, rests in a small notch carved into the wood, poised to score fine guidelines on parchment later. A small pile of sand or pounce is nearby too, a final safeguard against smudging, ready to absorb any stray droplets. The scribe straightens, surveying the arrangement as if blessing each object. Quills stand like silent sentinels in a wooden rack. The inkwells catch each glimmer of light. Knives and stylus lie in perfect alignment. A hush falls over the room as if the very stones hold their breath, awaiting the first word to emerge. In this moment of readiness, the scribe feels a calm certainty. All that remains is the parchment, smooth, pale, eager, and the exemplar waiting on the lectern. Before moving on, the scribe closes the eyes for a single heartbeat, breathing in the mingled scents of goose feather, oak gall, soot, and beeswax. Each tool is a promise, each ingredient a covenant with the day's work. Here, in the pale dawn of the scriptorium, the instruments have been gathered, purified by hand and ritual. Their quiet presence stands ready to guide the mind's intent, to transform thought into script. When at last the scribe opens the eyes, the chamber seems primed with possibility. The tools repose in gentle symmetry, the desk awaits its page, and beyond the window, the sky brightens toward morning. In the alchemy of tool in hand, the quiet ritual of gathering is complete. The day can now unfold in ink and parchment, and with it, the slow, steady heartbeat of medieval devotion and learning. Thus ends the careful assembly of implements. The next step, the selection of the exemplar and the first strokes of text, lies just ahead. But for now, in the soft hush of the scriptorium, all is arranged. The scribe lifts a quill, dips it ever so lightly into the ink, and prepares to carry the written word from mind to page, ready to pass through the centuries and silent lines of letter and lore. A soft shaft of morning light filters through the narrow arched window, tracing a pale streak across the flagstone floor. The scribe pauses at the threshold of the archival alcove, inhaling a whispered dustin vellum that hangs in the cool air. Long before the day's first task of marking lines and dipping quills, he must choose the exemplar, the authoritative text that will guide each precise stroke. In this vaulted niche, centuries of manuscripts rest upon thick oak shelves, row upon row of wooden chests and bound volumes, each chest carved with simple iron lock and hinge. The hush of the scriptorium lingers here, unbroken except for the faint rustle of parchment and the scribe's own measured breathing. He reaches for the nearest chest, noting the worn grain of the lid under his fingertips. Light from the wall-mounted lamp dances off its metal straps. With a deliberate gesture, he lifts the lid. A subtle sigh of air escapes, stirred from within by the movement, and tiny motes of parchment dust drift upward in the lamp's glow. The topmost vellum scroll lies coiled, the edge faintly curled, bearing at its corner a small painted initial, a deep blue B, curled like a vine. The scribe lifts it gently, his fingers brushing aside a cluster of gathered motes, and sets it aside on a low table. Beneath it lies another scroll, slightly narrower, with a flaming red initial C, its color dulled by age, but still vivid against the creamy surface of the hide. One by one he retrieves 3 or 4 scrolls, placing them in a neat row before him. He leans close, eyes scanning each illuminated initial. The first features a stylized bird, etched in fine strokes of black ink and outlined in gold leaf. The second displays an ornate cross, its angles filled with emerald and cinnabar. The third shows interlaced knots of vine and tendril, the leaves a gentle green interspersed with blue, and tiny dots of red that once would have gleamed. His hand moves almost unconsciously, ghosting over the pigments, feeling their slight abrasion under the fingertip. He notes where the gold leaf has worn away, where the colored pigments sit atop the shell-white ground of the vellum like raised jewels. As he gazes, he considers not only the beauty but the legibility of these exemplars. In some, the letters are compact and uniform, the words spaced so evenly that the eye follows them as effortlessly as a river current. In others, the hand has cramped or hurried, ink bleeds outside the borders of each letter, blurring strokes and making certain words fatally unclear. He opens one scroll more fully, carefully unrolling it along the table's length. The script is a fine-textured Carolingian minuscule, each letter precisely formed, ascenders and descenders dancing in perfect proportion. Yet in places the ink has faded to a faint gray, and he squints, tilting the scroll so that the flame of the lamp schemes across the surface at an angle, revealing talismanic clarity where light meets shadow. Turning to another, he reads aloud in a low, reverent voice, Beatus virci non abide in concilio impurum. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. His own voice echoes softly in the hushed scriptorium alcove. The words feel familiar, a small comfort in the day's unfolding routine. He sees that this exemplar, though vibrant in hue, has a slight blot on the second line, some scribe slipped from years past. He marks the spot mentally, aware that any transcription drawn from this exemplar would require extra vigilance. He lays it aside, smoothing the scroll back to its humble coil. His gaze falls finally upon a stout codex resting on a donkey shelf. Its leather binding is deep brown, scuffed at the spine, bearing a simple blind-stamped cross. The foredge reveals gilded letter tips peeking like polished teeth. With a sense of ceremony, he lifts the volume, noting its reassuring weight in his hands. He opens it gently, turning to the table of contents pasted to the inside cover on a strip of parchment. The headings are written in alternating red and black ink, each chapter of the Psalter listed in order, each entry beginning with a single rubricated letter. He flips to the 23rd Psalm. There, the text is laid out in two neat columns, the margins trimmed carefully. The pigment of the rubricated initials remains deep and lustrous, the black ink of the minuscule letters still bold against the pale vellum. He watches his own breath miss the page before him, and then fragrance of vellum and ink rises, faint and musty. He considers the passage. The gentle cadence of Dominus Virgine, et nihil me durit, echoes in his mind, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He imagines the late afternoon light filtering through stained glass petals as monks recite this hymn of trust. The words offer solace in toil, a reminder of divine guidance in even the most meticulous of tasks. He glances again at the margin, a tiny note in a later hand, Manus gaudet in luz vestra. My soul rejoices in your light. That later scribe, centuries ago, clearly paused to reflect as well, and perhaps found the same quiet encouragement. Knowing this codex to be both precise and resonant, the scribe decides it will serve as today's exemplar. He closes the book gently, as if in prayer, and lays a small scrap of parchment atop it to mark the opening. Then, with deliberate care, he slides the volume back to its place on the shelf. He ties the vellum scrolls with a length of soft hemp cord and returns them to their chest, making certain each lies flat and secure. A final glance down the row of chests assures him that each piece is stored in the same order and orientation as he found them, an unspoken promise that the archive will remain undisturbed until the next careful hand. Retrieving the chosen codex once more, he carries it with quiet reverence toward his desk. The scriptorium feels suddenly larger, filled with unseen company, the silent presence of all who have read, copied, and treasured these writings before. He sets the codex beside his workspace and pulls forward a small wooden stand to hold it at a gentle angle. A slate weight rests atop the open page, keeping it from closing. The scribe straightens, lifts his eyes, and allows his mind a moment's rest before the next stage, the preparation of fresh parchment, the ruling of lines, the first stroke of quill. He can already hear the faint scrape of stylus against vellum, the rhythmic heartbeat of ink on page. In this chosen exemplar, he has found both guidance and inspiration. With the Psalter passage selected, the day's labors may begin. As he turns back to the codex, the hush in the scriptorium deepens into a promise that the hours ahead will unfold slowly, reverently, and with unwavering care. A hush settles over the scriptorium as the scribe places his hand on the stack of loose parchment sheets. Each one bears the pale, slightly translucent hue of animal hide, a lingering echo of the creature it once was. He draws one sheet forward, letting it catch the feeble morning light that seeps through the narrow window. The surface seems smooth and unblemished at first glance, but under his practiced eye the faintest irregularities begin to emerge. Across its width, a subtle waviness hints at areas where the grain of skin was uneven. Near one edge, a barely visible dark patch suggests where the tanning process left a slight discoloration. He pauses, holding the vellum aloft, and angling it against the clear glass of the window pane. Through the pale membrane he can see the outline of a tiny pinhole, an imperfection, but not an insurmountable one. With gentle pressure and a steady hand, he marks the spot with the tip of his stylus, mindful that even the smallest blemish must be noted. Drawing a second sheet up for inspection, he turns it slowly, feeling its weight between thumb and forefinger. The thickness feels uniform, neither too thin to tear easily, nor so thick that the ink might bleed or pool. He scans the surface inch by inch, searching for any trace of a dark scar where the animal's skin bore a scarlet mark, or of a rough patch that might flake under a quill's nib. Any such flaw would spoil the elegance of the script and risk catching the quill, causing a jagged letter instead of the gentle curves he strives to achieve. When he is satisfied that this sheet is suitable, he lays it flat on his wooden bench, its edges curling ever so slightly upward like the wings of a resting bird. Next comes the matter of securing the corners. He places the sheet upon a clean sanded board, one that bears faint scratches from countless previous days. From a small pouch at his belt he draws 4 tiny lead weights, each shaped like a miniature spindle. With careful precision he sets a weight at each corner of the parchment, pressing just enough of the sheet to lie perfectly flat without stretching beyond its natural form. The weights make a barely audible clink as they settle into place, and the parchment responds by smoothing, its edges gently unrolling to meet the wooden board. He checks the tension with a fingertip, nudging a weight slightly this way and that until the sheet holds perfectly still. There is a quiet satisfaction in this simple act of bringing order to an otherwise supple material. Having flattened the parchment, he reaches for a small porringer of powdered pumice, its surface rough as sandstone. With a handful gathered on his fingertips, he begins to rub the substance in light circular motions across the vellum's face. Each motion is deliberate and unhurried, as though coaxing the parchment into readiness for the ink that will soon flow. The pumice gently abrades the surface, lifting tiny fibers and creating a slightly roughened texture that will capture the ink more evenly. He works systematically from top to bottom, side to side, ensuring every inch receives the same treatment. The clouds of fine white dust that drift upward catch the light like tiny motes of mist, and he breathes them in for a moment before lowering his head to avoid the heaviest veils. Once the rubbing is complete, he turns to a soft cloth to brush away the pumice dust. With long, smooth strokes he wipes the entire surface, removing every trace of grit until the parchment gleams softly under the lamp's warm glow. His movements are rhythmic, almost meditative, each pass of the cloth bringing the sheet closer to a uniform sheen. He pauses occasionally to run a finger along the surface, feeling for any remaining rough spots that might have escaped notice. Where his finger catches even a hair's breadth of unevenness, he returns with a fresh pinch of pumice to smooth it further. The entire process can take as long as the most intricate page of text, but he practices the patience demanded by his craft without complaint. As he works, he reflects on how this physical preparation echoes the spiritual discipline that underpins every monastic duty. Just as the parchment must be cleansed of flaws and made receptive to the quill's strokes, so too must the soul be smoothed by prayer and contrition before it can receive the word of God. In these quiet moments, the scent of chalky dust mingles with the faint aroma of burning tallow from the row of candles along the walls. The steady hiss of molten wax and the soft patter of brush on vellum form a gentle counterpoint to his thoughts. Time seems to slow, each second drawn out until it feels nearly endless. Yet he does not mind. This is the pace of creation in the Scriptorium, where haste is the enemy of perfection. When the parchment is finally free of all visible flaws and has the uniform texture he seeks, he carries the board to his desk, placing it alongside the exemplar that lies open to the day's chosen passage. He removes the tiny weights and transfers them back into his pouch with careful fingers. The sheet remains flat, its surface now prepared to receive the first strokes of ink. He breathes deeply, centering himself for the next stage of work. Soon he will draw the guideline lines that will keep his script pure and straight, but for now this moment of readiness brings its own quiet satisfaction. In the stillness that follows, he allows himself to admire the pale sheet before him. It holds the promise of transformation, the blank canvas awaiting the flow of holy words, illuminated initials, and the gilded shimmer of gold leaf. Each step he has taken, inspection, flattening, roughening, and cleansing, has been an act of careful service, a ritual that ensures the final manuscript will endure for generations. The parchment, once mere animal skin, has become an instrument of devotion, shaped by human hands to bear the light of sacred text. Almost imperceptibly, the scribe's thoughts drift ahead to the next chapter of his labor. In a few moments he will measure margins and score faint lines to guide his hand in drawing letters of uniform height and spacing. But before those measured grooves are laid down, this perfectly prepared sheet stands ready. He gathers his tools, a ruler fashioned from folded parchment and a slender bone stylus, and allows himself one last steadying breath in the calm of the scriptorium. The candles flicker, the stone walls seem to breathe with him, and the day's work moves gently forward, one deliberate step at a time. A pale radiance drifts through the narrow slits of high-set windows, mingling with the wavering glow of the tallow candles that line the walls of the scriptorium. The air remains cool and hushed, as though the very stones and wooden beams hold their breath in order to grant the scribe absolute stillness. Having smoothed and pumice each sheet of vellum until the surface has taken on a faint sheen, the scribe pauses, dipping a fingertip into a bowl of fine pumice powder and gently brushing away the last residue of hide dust. Now the time has come to impose order upon the gleaming pages, to draw the faint, precise lines that will guide each letter, each word, each phrase into strict harmony and evenness. This process, ruling the guideline lines, marks the quiet triumph of planning and preparation, a delicate choreography of measuring, marking, and scoring that renders a blank surface ready to receive ink. First comes the ritual of measuring the margins. The scribe reaches for a slender strip of parchment, folded repeatedly into an even, narrow band roughly the width of a little finger. This folded measure has been cut months ago and kept in a small wooden box alongside quills and penknives. Rounding the corner of the workspace, the scribe lays one sheet of prepared vellum upon the bench and aligns the folded strip along the left edge. He observes by candlelight the way the glow catches the rich cream tone of the vellum and the slight translucence of the strip. Pressing gently, fingertip against parchment strip, he marks a minute indent at the top of the page, then at the bottom, creating two tiny pricks that denote the width of the margin. Patiently, he repeats this along the right edge. These small pinpricks will serve as silent witnesses, guiding the straight edge to know where ink must not trespass. The scribe lifts the strip and tucks it back into its box, mindful of its vital role, but content to return it to repose now that its task is complete. Next, the scribe fetches the rule, a straight, narrow bar of wood hardened by heat, its surface level to unwavering exactness. Along its edge runs an ingrained lead wire, smoothed down by use until its line slides softly and confidently across fine parchment. The scribe checks the line with a critical eye. Is the lead flush with the wooden bar? Does it protrude the barest fraction of a hair's breadth, just enough to leave a faint indentation without tearing the surface? Satisfied, he sets the rule at the very top of the folio, aligning it between the two pricks. With a stylus lifted in the other hand, a slender bone tool sharpened to a gentle point, he steadies his breath and draws a quiet stroke across the surface. It is not ink that marks the page, but the barely perceptible score, a shallow channel that catches the candle's side light and reveals the path upon which words will march. The scribe's wrist moves with deliberate calm, his gaze focused, his movements unhurried, confident in the knowledge that this first horizontal line is the keel upon which the text will rest. He continues downward, measuring from line to line with the same folded strip of parchment, using the width of the band as a unit. 5 spaces below the first, another horizontal score. 5 more, another. Soon there appears on the page a regiment of equidistant lines, delicate furrows that promise uniform rolls of text. Between them hover the soft shadows of candlelight. Beneath them, the seal of ink will soon leave its mark. The scribe worked from top to bottom, from left margin to right, completing each row in turn, dipping the stylus occasionally into a bowl of oil to ensure a smooth glide. At times he pauses to press his fingertip along a line, feeling the indentation, confirming its faint firmness. Each sheet demands this ritual, this slow ceremony of measured intervals and precise alignment, and each yields to his practiced touch. Having ruled one sheet, the scribe moves to the next. Yet to save time and guarantee perfect consistency across multiple folios, he gathers three at a time, stacking them carefully so that their corners match exactly. With a gentle tap, he lines up the edges of the vellum, and then, one by one, pricks the corners through all sheets at once, making certain that every page will bear indentations in the same position. The straight rule then glides atop the stack, its lead edge scoring through each layer, forging lines that mirror one another as though all the pages were but one. This communal approach, stacking, pricking, ruling, ensures that when the sheets are later turned into gatherings, the text on every leaf follows the same invisible scaffold. In moments of concentration, the flicker of a candle or the soft draft through the open door becomes more than mere background. It is part of a cycle in which the scribe, the instruments, the living flame, and the quiet stone chamber all join in a precise and unhurried dance. The stylus taps at the edges for the final right-hand margin line, and the scribe's eyes close for a heartbeat as he tilts the parchment toward the light, assessing the uniform width between the margins. He senses, rather than sees, the faint ridges that lie like measured furrows across the page. Only then does he allow himself a small nod, as though greeting an old friend whose manners and devotion he has come to trust. One sheet complete, he chooses another and repeats the process. Though the ritual is the same, each sheet presents its own slight irregularities, perhaps a stretch of vellum that bows here, a section that feels a fraction thicker there. Here, the stylist must press a touch more firmly. There, the scribe must lighten his hand. So he works, ever attuned to the whisper of leather, the soft scrape of bone on vellum, the glimmer of light along each scratched line. Hours seem to pass simultaneously in slow motion and in the blink of an eye. Candle flames drift and bend. The air remains still and cool, filled only with the hush of effort and the scribe's steady breathing. As the last sheet lies ruled and ready, the scribe straightens back in his stool, offering a brief prayer of quiet gratitude for the process. Soon, this network of faint incisions will receive the careful strokes of the quill, forming letters whose uniform grace depends upon these guided boundaries. Having ensured that each margin is faithful in measurement and every horizontal furrow runs true, the scribe lays aside the rule and stylus and extinguishes one of the smaller candles to deepen the contrast of light and shadow. The bench bears witness to an array of ruled sheets, their blank surfaces now pregnant with potential. Ink remains undisturbed in its inkwell. Quills lie poised but idle, waiting. The scribe rises, stretching arms above his head and feeling the soft crackle of his back releasing tension. He steps forward to the narrow table where the exemplar psalter awaits. Beyond these ruled folios lies the delicate moment when quill meets ink, when the first strokes of the script will follow the channels traced so meticulously. But for now, he allows himself a tranquil moment to survey the fruits of measured labor, the silent geometry of margins and lines, the promise of neat columns, the horizon of words yet unwritten. In the soft hush of the scriptorium, with lamplight dancing on pale vellum, the stage is set. The blank but ordered pages are ready to receive the living breath of text. And so, with calm resolve, the scribe returns to his stool, lifting a quill to inspect its tip, already preparing for the next chapter of this day's gentle work. A thin column of pale light slants through the narrow window high on the wall, illuminating motes of dust that drift like lazy spirits in the still air. The scribe settles onto the low wooden bench, body mindful of the day's work, but tempered by the hour's quiet calm. Before him lies the newly ruled parchment, each faint line a reservoir potential, guiding the gentle hand that will soon glide over its surface. He reaches for the quill he fashioned earlier, a goose feather trimmed to a precise angle, the nib sharpened to a razor edge. Beside it sits the inkwell, its black surface still stirred, faint ripples dark as night. He lifts the quill with deliberate slowness, bending to the flickering wick of a tallow lamp. The flame shudders in a whispered draft, yet the pale tongue of fire steadies when he draws nearer. Lowering his head, he dips the quill just enough for the ink to lap the metal point. The moment the tip touches the inky pool, the feather quivers, as if tasting both cold water and warmth from his palm. He lifts the quill again, observing the tiny bead of ink clinging to the nib split. There is something intimate in this union of feather, metal, and pigment, a silent promise that each letter will bear the weight of centuries. Before committing the first letter to the parchment, the scribe tests the quill's flow upon a scrap of vellum set aside. He lays a single line of text in a fluid, unhurried motion, an initial practice A formed by a measured downstroke and a gentle upturn. The ink settles, dark and velvety, a perfect curve that neither blots nor drips. He pauses, eyeing the mark as if greeting an old friend, testing its consistency. A small bead of moisture forms on the edge of the inkwell, shaken loose by the quill's passage. With his thumb he tucks away the excess, then returns the quill to its place. Turning his gaze back to the ruled folio, the scribe inhales the silence of the scriptorium. Only the soft hiss of the candle and the faint scratch of the stylus marks the quiet. Slowly he begins to write. The first word emerges letter by letter. Each stroke traces a line so exact that the margins seem to bow before it. The downstroke is firm, the upstroke light, the crossbar of the T, a gentle caress. Between each letter the quill is lifted, the nib glimpsed and wiped by a small strip of cloth, ensuring no errant droplet mars the vellum. A rhythm forms, dip, write, wipe, pause, and with it a meditation takes hold. He writes in measured cadence, breathing slowly as he guides the quill across the sheet. The words, part of a psalter he has copied many times before, are familiar partners now. Yet the fresh page invites renewed attention, a small imperfection, a little spot of too dense ink, or a tremor in the serifs would betray him. And so each letter demands full presence. D feels the quill trace the delicate curl of the G, the tiny flourish on the P, and the narrow space between parallel strokes that give the script its distinctive texture. Even his heartbeat seems to echo the pattern, the steady beating of a craftsman in full concentration. After a dozen lines, his wrist grows stiff. He gently rolls his fingers, flexing each joint before he resumes. The candle on the desk flickers, sending dancing shadows across the vellum, but he treats the movement like a soft lullaby, a companion to the pen's light scratch. As he writes, the room's layers of sound, the crackle of the wick, the faint sigh of door hinges, even the distant murmur of water in the cloister's fountain, blend into a lulled monotony that soothes rather than distracts. Now and then he pauses to stir the ink with the quill shaft, coaxing fresh pigment into the shallow well. Tiny flecks of soot settle on the surface, only to be swept away by a quick swirl. He touches the nib to the scrap vellum again, ensuring a steady flow, and then returns to the live page. The script builds across the sheet, a neat procession of letters that march with quiet precision. Each word carries the weight of tradition and the promise of eternity. The simple act of copying sacred text becomes an offering, a prayer transcribed in the silence of dawn. An hour passes, or perhaps two. Time is measured not by clocks, but by the slow advancement of ink on parchment. The scribe maintains a gentle vigilance, ready to correct a stray blot or to smooth a ridge in the vellum with a fingernail. When a small irregularity appears, a slightly heavier blob of ink, he sets aside the quill, draws a razor-sharp knife from the desk's small drawer, and carefully shaves away the blemish. He then redefines the corrected line with deliberate strokes, erasing all evidence of imperfection. Once more the quill returns to the inkwell. He dips and lifts, the nib gleaming with dark fluid. The next passage begins, a sequence of short, evenly spaced words. Under his hand, the script unfolds like a gentle river, guided by invisible banks. The scent of ink and parchment grows more pronounced, mingling with a faint tang of oil from the lamp. Outside, the morning light has strengthened, brightening the high window lattice, yet the room remains cool, an environment preserved for ink's perfect behavior. He writes on, dwelling on each letter as though it were the first ever formed. Though his mind understands the words by heart, his hand remains alert to every motion, every nuance of pressure. A teacher of novices might marvel at his steadiness, but the scribe knows that mastery is not triumph over challenge, but constant engagement with it. Each new line is an invitation to renew his devotion to craft and to faith. Silently, He senses the hour for mid-morning prayer approaching. The toll of the chapel bell will soon ripple through the corridor just beyond the scriptorium door. Yet he continues, committed to finishing the current folio. With a final flourish, he completes the line and lifts the quill once more. The ink drips briefly before settling into smooth darkness. He wipes the nib on a soft cloth, then lays the pen to rest in its carved cradle. Only then does he set aside the completed page and rise, stretching arms and back after the long vigil at the bench. The manuscript before him gleams beneath the lamp, rows of perfect letters marching in silent order across the vellum. He breathes deeply, inhaling the mixed scents of ink and candle wax, parchment and dust. In the stillness he offers a quiet thanksgiving for the day's work, mindful of the next chapter awaiting his hand. And as he rises to join his brethren in prayer, the faint echo of his pen's last stroke lingers in the air, a gentle herald of the hours to come. The lamp stands dark and still before the scribe. He closes his quill knife with a soft click, then lays it gently beside the empty inkwell. The cool wax of the last candle on the desk has hardened into a pale puckered ring around its brass holder. With deliberate care, the scribe lifts the snuffer, a small cone of iron with a slender handle, and covers the glowing wick. A thin plume of smoke curls upward, vanishing in the vaulted ceiling. In the sudden hush, the only sound is the faint drip of water from a stone trough beyond the scriptorium door and the distant murmur of other scribes stowing their tools. On the bench, parchments lie flat, their faintly scored lines still visible, waiting until prayers conclude and the pen may again be taken up. He rises slowly, brushing the tail of his habit free of any stray flecks of ink. The wooden floor beneath his sandals creaks softly as he steps away from his station, leaving the paraphernalia of letters and glyphs behind. For a moment he stands in the dim half-light, breathing in the mixture of musty parchment, beeswax, and barely cool metal. Every object here, the oaken bench, the well-worn stool, the racks of vellum, feels suspended in anticipation, as though the entire room holds its breath until the evening return. Turning at the lintel, he closes the scriptorium door with a muted thud. The hinges greet the wood with a metallic sigh. Beyond, an arched corridor stretches toward the heart of the abbey. Stone pillars rise in paired columns, linking vault to floor, casting cell-like shadows in the morning gloom. A narrow window set high in the wall catches a sliver of sunlight on its rough glass, scattering a faint amber glow. Here the air carries a hint of dampness, as if the stones themselves exhale the memory of last night's chill. His sandals make measured echoes on the flagstones. With each footfall he feels the vibrations of the great bell overhead, tolling the summons to lauds. The vibration moves through the soles of his feet, up his legs, reminding him of the unity of the community. He pauses beneath one of the arches to dip his fingers into a shallow stone basin inset in the wall. The water is cool with a trace of moss at its edge. He splashes his face and rubs his hands, dispelling the last traces of ink and pumice. For a moment, droplets cling to his lashes. The coldness quickens his pulse and clears the mind. Continuing down the corridor, he passes the cloister door, where the day's work feels suspended in time. He senses familiar figures in the distance, the breviaries, violet stole draped across his shoulders, moving with stately calm, the novice who practices the psalter in hushed breath, an older brother, stooped but sure, holding the breviary in one weathered hand. Their robes whisper over the stones like summer grasses. None speak, all know the rhythms of prayer by heart. The corridor widens as he draws near the chapel portal. A carved impanum, a scene from the Gospels, hovers above the door, its figures folded into reverent abstraction. He pauses before the chapel entrance. Two slender lamps flicker at the jambs, their candles trimmed to identical height. Behind the doors, lattice light from east-facing windows promises a gentle influx of morning rays. The scribe bows his head and makes the sign of the cross. With a steady hand, he pushes open the heavy oaken doors. A gust of incense greets him, warm and creamy, mingled with the resinous tang of cedar beams. The sanctuary feels alive with half shadow and color, the deep reds of the hangings, the worn gold of an ancient icon above the altar, the burnished wood of the pews. He moves to his usual place on the right side, near a narrow window where the glass is pale green. Here the light filters softly, illuminating the folds of his robe and tracing lines on the stone floor like gentle footprints. He kneels on the thin mat of rushes. Around him, the choir of brothers arranges itself in two ranks before the lectern. Their voices, when they rise, form a low and constant hum, a living texture of sound rather than melody. The first psalm begins, Dominus illuminatio mea et salos mea, quantum mebo. A single voice leads, the rest respond in perfect unison, as though each man's breath blends with his neighbor's. The scribe bows his head, eyes closed, listening to the measured cadence of Latin vowels. Each syllable seems to roll forward on an unseen current, echoing gently among the pillars and vaults. The words rise and fall like the tide, in memoria ivor meditaber, in tuo lumen vitabimus lumen. Within the solemn stillness of the chapel, the meaning of each hymn unfolds slowly. His thoughts, once busy with ink-stained labors in the shapes of letters, now find solace in the ancient text. Time seems to dilate. The sound moves both outward into the vast stone space and inward into his own chest. He feels the weight of community around him, a shared devotion woven from countless dawns and vesper bells. The psalm moves to its close, and he makes the sign of the cross once again. The choir responds with a final amen, voices hovering in the air, before gently fading. A single candle atop the altar flickers, its flame casting the face of a painted saint in shifting shade. The head of the choir raises the psalter, Benedicamus Domino he intones. Deo gratias replies every brother in a soft swell that seems at once collective and utterly solitary. As the bell tolls its last note, the scribe remains bowed for a heartbeat longer. He senses the air cool and still now that the voices have ceased. Rising, he gathers the folds of his robe and moves toward the door. The chapel dims behind him, silent but for the distant drip of oil from the lamps. Back in the corridor, he retrieves a simple lantern, lights it, and resumes his slow walk to the scriptorium. In his mind, the whispered cadences of the psalms guide each step, measured, purposeful, serene. When at last he crosses the threshold into the workroom, the hush there seems different still, yes, but charged with the gentle momentum of prayer. He returns to his bench, settles onto the stool, and picks up his quill once more. The day's labor resumes, touched now by the memory of song and the quiet strength of shared devotion. A bell still trembling in the cool, vaulted air summons the scribe from the chapel's fading echoes back toward the scriptorium. The rhythmic swirl of psalms has subsided, leaving behind a tranquil hush, as though the very stones had paused to listen. The scribe draws a steadying breath, mindful of the shift from prayer to sustenance, and lifts the hem of his rough woolen tunic. With deliberate care, he unties the leather strap that holds his penknife at his waist, then slips free the well-worn apron he has worn since dawn. He hangs on a peg by the arched doorway, its surface still flecked with tiny specks of ink. A soft glimmer of afternoon light filters in through a narrow lancet window, illuminating motes of dust that drift like lazy spirits across the threshold. Before him lies a simple wooden bench, set low against the south wall of the scriptorium. Upon it rests a shallow bowl he has carried from the refectory. The bowl is of plain design, turned from fine-grained elm, but it bears the gentle grooves of the cobbler's blade and faint scorch marks where tallow candles once licked the rim. In its center sits a small heap of coarse, grayish bread, barley and rye, baked in a communal oven and hushed in its flavor by necessity rather than pride. The scribe settles onto the bench, feeling the familiar roughness of the plank beneath him, and lifts the wooden bowl onto his lap. He reaches out to the loaf beside him, its crust broken and rugged, each jagged shard revealing a crumb flecked with bran and kernel. He breaks off a chunk the size of his palm, more generous than the portions allotted at mealtime, but still modest. With gentle pressure of thumb against forefinger, he crumbles the soft interior, watching his stray crumbs drift to the bench like seeds on a winter breeze. The scent of warm grain rises, mingling with the lingering incense of morn's prayers. He closes his eyes for a moment, savoring the quiet perfume, a reward for the hours of concentrated toil that lie ahead. At his side stands a squat earthenware jug, its surface glazed in muted tones of earthen brown and green. The scribe lifts it carefully, mindful of its single looped handle, and pours a small cupful of watered ale into a smooth wooden cup. The ale is thin, its hue like diluted gold, and carries the faintest hiss of fermentation. A frothless sip brings a dank sweetness to his lips, and he tilts the cup to the last drop, mindful to avoid spilling a single precious ounce. The liquid coats his tongue, its comfort plain and humble, yet enough to still the rumble in his belly. He sets the cup aside, its surface glinting in the slanted light, and listens to the distant drip of an oil lamp in the corner, its soft glow punctuating the quiet. Nearby, another scribe occupies a similar bench, separated by a narrow shelf upon which rest half-finished folios and sharpened quills wrapped in linen cloth. The two acknowledge one another with a solemn nod. Words are spare in these moments of communal break, but they are shared all the same. The first scribe breaks off a second piece of bread, then offers a fragment across the short expanse of bench. The gesture is one of fraternal courtesy, a small act of fellowship that binds them in purpose. The second scribe accepts, breaking his own portion in two to share in return. Over crumbs of barley bread, they exchange quiet thoughts in measured tones. "You found the ink well at the back clogged this morning?" the first asks, gently tapping the bowl on the floor to hush the echo of speculation. The second raises a brow and wipes his hand on his morning sleeve. "Aye, black as pitch and thick as honey. I had to stir it thrice before the sediment lifted. Took nearly half an hour when I wished only to begin the psalm." He taps his thumb against the rim of the bowl, mindful not to jostle its contents. The first scribe nods, absently rotating the wooden cup in his palm. "I feared I might have spoiled my quill in the haste, but after our prayers I took the penknife and sliced it anew. Now the edge is keen, as crisp as a morn's frost." He takes a slow breath, inhaling the mingled scents of ale and scribal detritus, ink, dust, and bare wood. They sit in companionable silence a moment, each scribe lost to the warmth of bread and the faint comfort of watered ale. The slow pace of the break allows the mind to wander away from the meticulous lines of text, away from the measured arcs of letters that await their skilled hands. The scribe thinks of the exemplar open in his mind, of the oak-tinted parchment he will soon lay upon the desk, of the illuminated initial he plans to replicate. Yet for this brief respite, such thoughts remain subdued like the embers under a dying flame. When the bowl at his feet lies nearly empty, he lifts it once more, tilting it to catch any final crumb. With practiced motion, he caps the earthenware jug and returns it to the shelf behind him. The wooden cup he rinses with a few drops of water drawn from a leather waterskin, flicking the last wet bead to the floor in a tiny cascade that echoes like a raindrop in an empty corridor. The cup finds its place beside a row of identical vessels, each bearing the slight variations of hand-carved rings and notches. The scribe rises from the bench, stretching arms above his head. His sleeves, rolled to the elbow, reveal forearms dusted with fine parchment flour, a looming residue from the midday's infusion of chalk and pumice. He flexes his fingers, noting already the subtle stiffness that follows even the briefest rest. The simple act of lifting bread and hand to mouth has served to ease the tension, but soon he must attend again to the delicate tension of quill against vellum. His companion stands as well, and together they walk back toward the narrow desk at the center of the scriptorium. Along the way they pass racks of stacked folios, the corners of each manuscript peeking like pale windows into a world of letters. They pause under an oil lamp, its flame steady and yellow, to reignite the wick that had guttered low. A soft bead of melted tallow drips to the stone floor, its hiss barely perceptible. The scribe pulls his stool forward, brushes a stray bit of straw from the seat, and positions himself before the desk. He lays open the exemplar, today's Psalter passage, its faintly yellowed vellum held open by two small iron weights. The text, written in a rounded Gothic hand, beckons with familiar shapes, each word a path to be trodden once more by pen. He reaches for his quill, freshly trimmed and still sharp, and dips the nib into the freshly stirred ink he had prepared before prayer. Dark liquid clings to the tip, promising crisp lines and clear strokes. Before he begins, his eyes linger a moment on the empty sheet of parchment awaiting translation. Its surface, still cool and smooth from the morning's pumice, seems to hold its breath in anticipation. The scribe inhales deeply, feeling the energy from the simple bread and ale pulse through him. In the shared quiet of the scriptorium, he senses both the weight of responsibility and the gentle joy of his craft, securing the knowledge that each measure of sustenance brings him closer to the luminous page. Then, with hand steady and mind sharpened by calm reflection, he bends low, brings pen to parchment, and the first stroke of ink falls, a singular drop of black that marks the resumption of labor. In the hush that follows, the scriptorium breathes once more with the rhythm of work. The measure of bread and ale, brief and unassuming, has now done its part, nurturing body and spirit alike, and the scribe returns to his task, ready to transform humble materials into a testament of faith and devotion. The midday light filtered through the narrow window high in the scriptorium wall, casting a pale, languid glow across the wooden desk. The scribe, refreshed from bread and ale and bolstered by the warmth of shared prayer, settled once more into his seat. He inhaled the faint, comforting scent of sun-dried parchment mingled with the lingering aroma of oak gall and resinous candle smoke. His fingers, still supple from washing and kneading the dough of the bread, found the familiar grooves of his writing bench as though greeting an old friend. A moment of silence passed, broken only by the soft rustle of vellum and the distant echo of a bell tolling in the churchyard. Then he reached for the exemplar. The exemplar lay to his left, its pages opened at the chosen passage of the Psalter. The delicate script of the master copy was faintly illuminated by pale gold leaf around each initial, though here and there the gilding had dulled with age. Carefully, the scribe shifted the exemplar closer, adjusting a small wooden wedge beneath its spine so that the pages would not slip as he wrote. He placed a narrow strip of parchment beneath his forearm to steady his hand and prevent the ink from smearing. Then he aligned his new manuscript to the right, ensuring that the margins matched precisely those in the exemplar. Each guideline he had scored into the fresh page the previous morning now awaited his quill, pale and ready. With practiced grace, he dipped the quill into the inkwell, the tip seeking the dark, viscous liquid. The small inkwell was set in a shallow recess carved into the wooden bench, so that even the slightest tremor would not spill its contents. He drew the nib slowly upward, allowing a single bead of ink to form before touching the quill to the parchment. His breathing slowed, matching the gentle pulse at his wrist, and he began to write. The first line formed in a series of measured strokes, each letter born at the same deliberate motion. The scribe traced the small ascenders and descenders of minuscule script with unwavering focus. A brief pause as the quill dipped again. He tested its tip on the blank corner of the sheet, watching the ink feather subtly into the fibers before pressing forward. The text grew steadily, the psalm's verses weaving across the page in regular cadence. Each word mirrored the exemplar, yet the act of writing rendered it unique, the scribe's own hand imparting a gentle rhythm to the otherwise unchanging letters. He continued, line after line, his mind neither wandering nor fully present, balanced between concentration and communion with his craft. Occasionally he lifted his head to glance at the exemplar, confirming the sequence of words, verse 15, verse 16. His eyes traced the illuminated initial at the start of each section, noting the subtle flourishes that would one day guide the illuminator's brush. In the still air, he could hear the tiniest rasp of penknife against parchment as he occasionally adjusted the quill's nib, sharpening the edge to maintain a crisp stroke. With each passage completed, he paused to draw a deep breath, sniffing the dry parchment's faint musk and the pang of iron gall ink. There was a peculiar reassurance in this mingled scent, as if the very air of the scriptorium bore witness to centuries of scribes before him. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, recalling the hush of dawn when he first lit the lamps, and the long hours spent preparing quills and mixing ink. Now, in the fullness of midday, those earlier labors bore fruit in these tidy rows of text. Time slipped by unnoticed. A single sunbeam had lengthened by degrees, shifting across the floor's rough-hewn boards. Yet still he labored, finger following finger, word after word. His hand moved with a steady confidence, each motion rehearsed and unhurried. He felt no hurry for the next chapter or the next task. For now, the simple act of copying text was enough. In this moment, the small parchment was a world in itself, and he its sole inhabitant. When the quill grew laden and the strokes blotted faintly, he paused, lifted the pen, and set it aside. He reached instead for his penknife. With a few precise passes, he scraped away the swollen ink, smoothing the surface until it reclaimed the warm, creamy tone of the parchment. Then he dampened a small scrap of cloth, patted it dry, and wiped the page clean. This delicate ritual of erasure and smoothing brought a small satisfaction. The knowledge that any blemish could be corrected, every line refined. Resuming his work, he dipped the quill once more. The verse resumed at the point where he had left off, and the script resumed its measured dance. The scribe felt the familiar strain in his shoulder, a gentle ache that reminded him of the physical nature of his craft. He adjusted his posture, straightened his back, and let his shoulder drop, exchanging the strain for a mindful ease. The wood of the bench pressed into his knees, the faint scent of resin still clinging to his robe. He let these sensations anchor him, guiding his hand as it moved across the page. From time to time he paused not from fatigue but in contemplative reflection. Each phrase of the psalm held a cadence, a resonance he could almost hear chanted in the chapel. He whispered the words aloud in a hushed monotone, not in haste but in devotion, allowing their ancient wisdom to ripple through his mind. The language felt timeless, each letter a bridge between the past and the present. In these quiet intervals he sensed the silent companionship of every scribe who had ever bent over vellum, quill in hand, breathing life into words. As the afternoon light waned, he looked again at the exemplar. The page he had set aside earlier was nearly half transcribed. He aligned the margins one last time, ensuring that the line spacing remained consistent. Beneath his left elbow he felt the reassuring weight of his guide sheet. The scribe dipped his quill and continued, each word affirming the silent vow he had taken, to preserve, to immortalize, to carry forward the words of Scripture. He noticed, too, the faint ring of his own heartbeat, a soft percussion beneath the sound of pen on parchment. The steady progress of ink upon page felt akin to breathing itself, necessary, rhythmic, life-giving. With measured strokes, he formed the final words of his second column. He paused, lifted the quill, and rested his head on folded arms. The page before him bore witness to his labor, neat lines of black text evenly spaced, ready for the next stage of illumination. Slowly the scribe sat upright and surveyed his work. The afternoon sun had slipped lower, and the candlelight now filled the room with a warm, tremulous glow. Shadows wavered along the walls, and the faint scent of warming wax mingled with oak gall fumes. He felt a quiet pride in the orderly page. It was neither rushed nor ornate, merely faithful and true. Tomorrow, he knew, he would break from script and turn to color. For the illustrated initials lay waiting in his palette box. Lapis lazuli and vermilion, gold leaf and verdigris, new tasks would soon unfold. But in this calm moment he allowed himself to rest, content in the knowledge that the words he had written would endure beyond the reach of time. Thus ended the steady progress of this day's transcription, a gentle bridge between simple script and the vibrant illuminations to come. And as he closed his eyes to the hush of the scriptorium, the whisper of quill on parchment still echoed softly, guiding him toward the next chapter of his sacred work. The lantern's flame trembles against the rough-hewn walls of the scriptorium as the scribe settles into the familiar posture at its low, sturdy bench. Before him lies a rough slab of alabaster, its smooth surface pale and cold. With deliberate care, he retrieves a mass of lapis lazuli nodules, hard, midnight blue stones speckled with flecks of gold pyrite, and places them on the stone. The granules clink softly, echoing in the hush of the chamber. Above, the high window admits a pale shaft of afternoon light, illuminating motes of dust that drift like tiny spirits in the still air. All is quiet save for the slow, rhythmic whisper of quill against parchment drifting in from the workbench beyond. He takes a course, rounded mortar carved from volcanic rock, and balances it on a small wooden pad so that the surface will not slip. In his right hand he clasps the pestle, its handle worn smooth by seasons of use. He lays the largest fragment of lapis lazuli inside the mortar and brings the pestle down with gentle force. The first blow sends tiny chips flying, revealing the intense, velvety blue within. Again and again he presses and grinds, moving with measured patience. The dust that rises holds the color of twilight itself, a rich, luminous blue that seems almost to glow in the dim light. He pauses to inspect the powder. Some grains still glint with mineral hardness, too coarse for the finest illumination. With the edge of his knife he schemes away the larger fragments, reserving them for further grinding. Then once more he pounds, turning the stone into a fine, silky powder that slips through his fingers like heated sand. By the time the lapis has yielded its full measure of pigment, a small mound of ultramarine rests in the center of the alabaster slab. The scribe draws in a breath and inhales the faint, chalky scent of stone. With a fine brush made of squirrel fur, he brushes away any lingering chips from the mortar, ensuring no stray grit will mar the delicate vellum pages in the next stages of illumination. He dips the tip of a slender metal spatula into the ultramarine and scoops a tiny heap onto a wooden pallet carved with shallow wells. The blue lies there, pure and intense, ready to be coaxed into paint. Next he turns to a flattened piece of birch bark, upon which he has spread a small pile of crushed vermilion, a pigment made from cinnabar or synthesized through more recent alchemical methods. The vermilion's red is fierce, like embers glowing in the hearth, and when caught by lamplight it seems to flicker with an inner flame. He fetches a quill, dipped in water, and sprinkles a few drops across the mound. Then, with downward strokes of a slender glass muller, a tool as old as some of the manuscripts around him, he works the red powder into a paste. Each movement is smooth and steady, the paste growing more translucent and lustrous as the pigment particles unlock their color potential. At intervals he pauses to taste the slightest moisture on his lips, confirming the proper balance of pigment to binding medium. For a binder, he has chosen the white of an egg laid by the monastery's own Henry. It has been separated carefully from its yolk, strained through linen to remove any callousy or foreign flecks, and aged for a day so that its surface tension will be ideal. The scribe uses a toothpick to draw a small droplet of egg white into the vermilion paste, mixing with a flick of his wrist. The bright red deepens, taking on a soft gloss that shimmers when he holds the palette to the light. He repeats the process, adding minute quantities of egg white until the paste flows like syrup, neither too runny to bleed across the vellum nor so thick that it will clump under his brush. Around him, the scriptorium shadows grow longer as the sun sinks toward the western hills. The scribe spreads out other pigments on the palette, verdigris for green, made from copper filings and vinegar, and a pale yellow derived from powdered saffron and gum arabic. Each pigment lies in its own well, separated but ready to mingle in subtle gradations of hue when the time comes. He organizes his brushes by size and bristle type, soft squirrel for broad washes, stiffer boar for minute details, and a single weasel curl for gold burnishing. Though his hands bear the slight stains of pigment, there is a reverence in the way he handles each tool, as if cradling a prayer. As the final stage of preparation, he fashions small parchment labels for each pigment well. Using a pointed stylus, he scores the names in careful Latin script, ultramarinus minium verdigris flavum croci. These markers will guard against error when later he dips again and again to fill the decorated initials and border flourishes. He glances once more at the array of colors, blue as the heavens, red as the blood of Christ, green as new spring leaves, yellow as dawn's first light, and feels a quiet satisfaction. These are not mere paints, but the very embodiment of sacred words, destined to adorn the Gospels or Psalter with a beauty worthy of divine wisdom. A distant bell tolls for the late evening prayer. The scribe pauses and bows his head, offering a silent devotion that the work of his hands might serve the glory of God. Then, with measured calm, he extinguishes the small lamp beside him, careful to preserve a faint glow for the next tasks. He covers the pigments with a linen cloth to keep out dust and humidity, planning to resume the labors at first light. As he steps away from the bench, he runs his fingers lightly over the smooth alabaster, already anticipating the moment when the pure ultramarine and vermilion will be coaxed into the curving stroke of an initial, breathing life into the manuscript's blank margins. Thus ends the work of mixing colors for illumination, a process both humble and exalted. In the flickering twilight, the scribe leaves behind a quiet symphony of grinding, mixing, and organizing. The pigments sleep now in their palettes, awaiting the dawn when each will be called forth to bring light and color to the Scriptorium's sacred pages. Chapter 11 will find him at his bench once more, brush poised, ready to transform these humble powders into shimmering letters and vibrant borders, each stroke a testament to devotion, patience, and the enduring art of the medieval scriptorium. Narrow shafts of daylight slant through the high arched window of the scriptorium, dancing lightly across the low desk where my pigments lie quietly in bone dishes. The faint scent of ground lapis and crushed vermilion mingles with the earthy aroma of damp stone and beeswax from the nearby candles. I pause for a moment, letting my eyes adjust from the bright courtyard beyond to the gentle glow inside. Before me lies the sheet of parchment ruled with faint pencil-like lines, and at its margin sits the enlarged first letter of my Psalter passage, sketched in light charcoal, the invitation to creation, the stage for every stroke of color, every shimmer of gold to come. I settle onto the wooden bench, feet braced against the cold floor, and breathe slowly. My hand hovers over a small brush fashioned from squirrel hair, its tip tapered to an almost imperceptible point. In my other hand, a thin reed pen stands ready, dipped in the dense black ink I prepared before dawn. I touch the quill to the parchment and begin with the outline of the letter. Each curve, each serif is traced deliberately as if I were walking the path of the initial itself. The line emerges as a steady ribbon of twilight, each millimeter measured against the guideline below. In this delicate outlining, I find a meditative rhythm. Point by point, the black ink flows into the fibers of the vellum. The slightest tremor in my wrist would betray my work, yet I lean forward with quiet concentration, endeavoring to hold my pulse as still as the stone walls. I trace a thin loop here, a gentle flick there, defining the expansive bow of the letter and the slender sweeps of its ascenders. As candlelight quivers upon the ink, I note the subtle irregularities and adjust, redrawing a segment with the sharp point of my quill to restore symmetry. Once the outline feels complete, I set aside the pen and lift the brush to my lips, dampening its fibers with a careful lick. I blot the moisture on a scrap of leather to ensure the bristles are supple but not dripping. Then I turn to the first pigment, ultramarine, ground from lapis lazuli, pounded so finely that the crystalline dust gleams like morning frost. A whisper of water and a touch of hide glue transform the powder into a glossy paint. I draw a thin bead of blue into the dish and touch the tip of the brush to the surface. At first, the color deposits faintly, a pale haze of azure. I stroke again, layering pigment until the hue deepens to a sky at rising dawn. Filling the interior of the initial, I move with slow deliberation. The brush glides over the vein-like texture of the parchment, leaving a smooth film of color that seems to settle into the document's memory. When the space is glazed with blue, I pause to let the pigment dry, for hastening would risk smudges and unevenness. My gaze drifts upward to the open courtyard, where the bells from midday toll softly, reminding me of the hours spent in prayer and study. Then I return to my desk. Next comes the bright vermilion. In a dish beside me, the red pigment, mixed with a drop of egg white to bind it, lies like crushed rubies. I stir the mixture with a slender bone spatula until it holds together in a fine slurry. Then, with a fresh dip of the brush, I approach the decorative filigree that will surround the blue heart of the initial. I begin at the topmost arch, laying down a slender stroke of red that flows outward into a leaf-shaped motif. Each petal, each curving vine is painted with measured breaths, so that the red never domes or puddles, but adheres in a rich matte tape of color. Between the red and blue, I reserve spaces for a soft green, verdigris, ground from copper and stabilized with gum arabic. Mixed to a translucent wash, the green will contrast gently without overpowering. I draw the brush across the pigment, watching how the hue shifts with moisture and light. Applying it in short, controlled strokes, I complete the borders of the letter, a delicate garland of leaves woven into the red and blue, the interplay of hues forming a tapestry of living color. As the pigments dry in the gentle warmth of the chamber, I prepare for the final touch, gold highlights that will catch the candle flames like living fire. From a tiny pot, I lift a minute quantity of size, an adhesive made of fish glue and a tincture of saffron. With a separate brush, I paint slender lines along the outer curve of the initial and the edges of each leaf vein, laying the stage for the precious metal. The paste glistens wetly on the parchment, promising the glow to come. Gently, I open the packet of gold leaf, its edges so thin that a breath might lift them. I rest a wafer of the metal onto the sticky surface and brush the leaf with a soft cotton swab, coaxing it to adhere in every depression. The leaf tears and conforms, blanketing the outline in a pale, molten sheen. When the section is covered, I take a burnisher, an agate pebble set into a wooden handle, and rub in small circles. The metal gleams, transforming from dull yellow to a radiant glow that seems to glow from within the page. Stepping back for a moment, I let my eyes take in the work, the bold letter hovering amidst blank parchment, alive with blue, red, green, and gold. The sense of wholeness settles over me like a benediction. Candlelight now dances across the metallic surface, sending tiny reflections across the stone walls. For an instant, the scriptorium feels less stone chamber and more cathedral of light. I dip my fingers into clean water and lightly brush away any stray fragments of gold dust. Then I pick up a flying knife and, in the corners of the design, score faint grooves to catch lingering pigment. Each tiny knot sharpens the edges of the composition, giving structure to the vivid swirl of decoration. My breathing slows, the work lies balanced, awaiting the next stage, the gilding proper, the binding, the final scrutiny by my master. The completed initial rests on the page like a threshold, inviting reader and prayer alike into the world of the text that follows. I lower my tools and offer a silent blessing over the leaf, mindful of the hours yet to come. Soon I will prepare the next letter, and then another, each following the same measured dance of ink and color, lead and gold. But for now I savor the quiet moment in which form and spirit meet upon this simple sheet of parchment, and I find in the rhythm of brush and burnisher a peaceful communion with the centuries of scribes who came before. The cool morning light filtered softly through the narrow lancet window as the scribe set aside the small brushes that had filled the decorated initial with lapis lazuli and vermilion. A hush settled in the chamber, broken only by the faint crackle of tallow in the oil lamp and the thud of a leather-bound exemplar closing on the shelf. Today's work would turn from pigment to metal, the gilding of the ornate initial, the moment at which the page would truly catch the flicker of candlelight and reveal its sacred glow. First, the scribe gathered the ingredients for the sizing mixture. On a well-worn tray lay a small wooden bowl of powdered rabbit-skin glue, a sticky, translucent substance prepared nights before, now cooled to room temperature. Beside it was the finest whiting chalk, sifted through a hair sieve, and a handful of clean water drawn from the stone cistern in the cloister. With a steady hand, the scribe poured a little water into a shallow dish, then gently stirred in pinches of the glue powder until the liquid thickened to the consistency of honey. A pinch of whiting was folded into the mixture to bind the adhesive and give it a creamy opacity. The scribe selected a clean, fine-bristled brush, one crafted from weasel hair, its tip tapered to a precise point, and drew it to the sizing, lifting the viscous substance with care. Bringing it to the desk, he placed the gilding frame beside the illuminated initial, its edges masked out by tiny strips of parchment to protect the surrounding colors. With measured strokes, he brushed a thin veil of sizing over the small filigree around the letter's curves and its delicate scrollwork. The paste gleamed pale and wet for a moment, then began to lose its sheen as it settled into every minute groove and relief. Patience was essential. Too wet, and the gold leaf might sink or wrinkle. Too dry, and it would fail to adhere. The scribe paused, watching the adhesive change from glossy to matte, a subtle transformation that marked the moment when the metal could be laid. He pressed a fingertip gently to the edge of the sizing, feeling for the faint tackiness that signaled readiness. When the brush strokes no longer left a glossy trace but yielded a soft, velvety grip, he cleared his throat and set down the brush. Now came the most delicate phase, handling the gold leaf. Each sheet was thinner than the finest tissue, so brittle that it might shatter at the slightest breath. The scribe took one square between the tips of a pair of bone tweezers, his sleeve carefully rolled back so no errant threads could brush against the gold. As he lifted it, a dancing halo seemed to form around his hand, tiny flakes floating in the air like motes of starlight. Holding the leaf of the seated initial, he lowered it gently, letting gravity ease the metal into the adhesive. For a heartbeat, nothing more was done. The scribe exhaled slowly, eyes half closed against the candle's blaze, allowing the gold leaf to settle. Then, with a soft pat of the brush's dry tip, he pressed it down, guiding its edges into the curves of the carved letter. Where the metal overlapped, he trimmed excess with the very edge of his penknife, slicing along the margin to release the extra leaf cleanly. Fine strips fell away, landing soundlessly on the parchment desk. He paused once more, stepping back to admire the newly gilded initial. Under the lamp's glow, it shone like a fragment of dawn, the pure metal shimmering with every movement of the hand. Yet the gleam was still irregular, the gold looking lifeless without a final burnish. The scribe fetched his burnisher, an ovoid piece of polished agate mounted in a wooden handle. With slow, circular motions he buffed the gilded surface, first along the outer curve of the letter, then into the tightest loops of ornamentation. Each pass of agate over gold coaxed a deeper luster, the metal rising almost imperceptibly from the page until it caught the light as though it were alive. The scribe leaned in, head tilted, to ensure every recess was burnished, the tiny beads of sizing beneath the leaf compressed into a firm base, the gold itself rubbed smooth as a mirror. The burnisher's gentle pressure yielded a warm, glowing radiance that seemed to come from within the parchment itself. The fragrance of drying size, faintly musty and sweet, mingled with the scriptorium's familiar aromas, oil, ink, and the faint tang of chalk. The scribe inhaled, aware that this moment bound together hours of careful preparation, the stretching of vellum, the ruling of guidelines, the steady application of pigment and ink. In that gleaming initial, all the day's labor was crystallized, a silent testament to patient devotion. Still, there was more to do. Any loose edges of gold leaf had to be gently pressed down with cotton wads, small, rolled pieces of raw silk that left no lint upon the surface. The scribe tore a fragment of silk, rolled it between thumb and finger, and dabbed each corner of the leaf to secure it further. Afterward, he brushed the page clean with a dry feather, an owl feather prized for its softness, to remove any stray gold particles without scratching the burnished sheen. He set the page aside to rest, propped upright on a small wooden easel to allow the sizing to cure fully. As the initial gleamed in quiet repose, the scribe reached for a scrap of parchment and his penknife. With meticulous strokes, he removed every scrap of trimming, every vestige of metal that might flake off later. This final cleanup ensured that when the manuscript was bound and turned in prayerful hands, no loose glitter would mar the reading. A moment of stillness followed. The scribe paused at his bench, hands folded and eyes lowered, offering a silent prayer for guidance and perseverance. The day's work was far from complete. There remained verification against the exemplar, consultation with the master scribe, and the slow procession of finishing each folio. But here, in this quiet glow of gold and candle, he felt the sacred weight of tradition. In the chapters yet to come, this gilded initial would stand as the shining portal through which prayerful eyes entered the Psalter's sacred text. Each stroke, each brush of gold had been a step upon the path of faithful labor, connecting hand to heart, page to divine purpose. With humility, the scribe moved to close the gilding frame, to clean his tools once more, and to prepare for the afternoon's tasks. His mind serene in the knowledge that light and metal, ink and vellum, had been united in perfect harmony. A hush had settled over the scriptorium, now that the great midday light had crept beyond the east-facing windows and reached the long wooden tables where manuscripts lay in neat rows. The air was cool enough to keep ink from smudging, yet warm enough to chase away any lingering stiffness in the limbs. Here, in the gentle stillness, broken only by the faint scratch of quill upon vellum and the low murmur of distant voices, the scribe prepared for his next task, the slow, deliberate work of comparative verification. Having traced every gilded initial and painted every flourish, he now turned his attention to the words themselves, the heart of the manuscript, the very repository of devotion and learning. He set aside the folio he had just completed, resting it upon a clean pallet of linen. With care he lifted the lid of a large oak chest against the wall, and withdrew a second exemplar, an older volume, its spine worn but stable, its pages held together by cords that creaked softly as they moved. He opened this exemplar to the same psalm he had transcribed, letting his fingers find the exact line. His eyes, accustomed by now to the uniform rhythm of the script, scanned each letter, each punctus, each abbreviation mark, matching it against the freshly written line on his new parchment. The first words, Laudate Dominum Omnium Turum, appeared almost identical at first glance. The black ink upon the older vellum had faded in places, but the shape of the L and the arching flourish of the D were familiar. Yet, when he reached the phrase Ingentibus et populo, he paused. In the exemplar before him, the word populo bore a small terminal flourish on the O, a slight downward tick, whereas on his new folio the flourish had been omitted. Was this a mere personal flourish of a previous scribe, or did it signal a subtle variation of meaning? He marked the discrepancy lightly at the margin, using a small cross to record that here lay a question needing further counsel. Turning back to his work table, he produced a slender slip of parchment and wrote in tiny, precise letters, Populo emet, marking a note to himself that the ornamentation might not be purely decorative. He paused, lifted his quill to his lips, and examined the nib for stray splinters before dipping it again in ink. A clean line under the marginal note ensured it would catch the eye later during the final review with the head scribe. Then, leafing forward ever so carefully, he reached the next line, Et benedici Domino. Here the older exemplar included an abbreviation, a little tilde above the domini to indicate the genitive case that was absent in his copy. He noted this difference with equal precision, adding another small cross and penciling in the abbreviation sign he had missed. As he worked his way methodically down the column, the scribe felt the usual keen satisfaction of discovery. These variations, whether of small flourishes or of contracted signs, were the very threads that bound one manuscript to another, revealing the hands that had shaped, and sometimes reshaped, this text through generations. With each marking, he whispered the words beneath his breath, ensuring that his ear matched his eye, that the rhythm and cadence of the Latin flowed without interruption. Often a single misplaced stroke could alter meaning or of necessity demand correction. When he encountered an especially obscure variant, an alternate spelling of sanctificit rendered as sanctificit, with an unusual loop on the letter F, he hesitated. The exemplar lay open at his left, but he decided to consult a third source before committing any change. Gently, he closed the chest and retrieved another volume, this one smaller and less elaborately bound, perhaps used more often for quick reference. He turned its pages until he found the same passage, and there the spelling matched neither his copy nor the second exemplar exactly. Instead, a different ligature connected the CT of sanctificit, and the form of the letter I was shorter, nearly a simple stroke. Faced with three versions, each slightly varied, the scribe drew back. This was a moment calling not for haste, but for deliberation. He shifted the 3 volumes before him, the folio he had written, the second exemplar, and the small reference book, into a neat triad. Then, taking up his slender stylus, he made tidy notation marks at each contested word. Once the marks were in place, he rose quietly from his bench and began to traverse the scriptorium in search of Master Benedict, a senior scribe whose keen eye and years of experience lent his judgment's weight. The corridor beyond was arched, the stones worn smooth by centuries of feet, and torches mounted at intervals cast a warm glow upon the rough-hewn walls. In the senior scribe's chamber, Master Benedict sat at a table strewn with scraps of parchment and bottles of ink. He glanced up at the approach of the younger scribe, greeting him with a gentle nod. In the calm hush, the junior scribe presented the trio of books and pointed out each marginal mark. Master Benedict leaned forward, his robes rustling softly, and examined the notations. He ran a long finger along the line where Populo had been raised with a flourish, drawing the syllables on the air as if reading incantation. Then he consulted the smaller reference, his brow furrowed in thought. After a measured silence, he spoke in a low, steady voice. He explained that the flourish on Populo was indeed a decorative variant more common in art and workshops, whereas the form without it traced back to the school at Montrevaux. He advised that the scribe choose consistency within the manuscript itself, so if most instances bore the simpler form, then omitting the flourish would be acceptable. In the case of sanctifies it, Master Benedict noted that the ligature connecting the CT had evolved over time and that the more open form was easier to read for novices. He recommended updating the manuscript accordingly, adding the clear ligature only where the space permitted. The scribe nodded, absorbing each word. Together they made a small fire in an iron brazier and lit a green candle at the head of the table so that they might see every detail. The senior scribe capped his penknife and gestured for the younger to do the same, then guided him back to the folio. They moved slowly, deliberately, Master Benedict pointing out each marginal note. The student scribe made gentle strokes of ink, smoothing in the corrected ligatures and adding the tiny flourish where appropriate. Whenever he faltered, the master scribe placed a steadying hand upon his shoulder, guiding the quill's tip so that the line remained uniform. When at last the folio bore the final corrections, the two scribes leaned back, their tasks complete. The senior offered a brief prayer for guidance and clarity, and then they closed the third exemplar. The junior scribe replaced each book in its proper place, the oak chest clicking softly as it shut. Returning to his own desk, he laid the revised folio beside the one waiting his head, scribe's final review. The parchment bore a series of delicate annotations, crosses, tiny loops, and slender strokes, yet now all in harmony, each word affirmed by careful comparison. For a moment the scribe allowed himself to pause, breathing in the warm, lamp-lit air of the scriptorium. He felt the satisfaction of a chapter brought to meticulous completion, and the equipoise that arises when the mind and hand have worked in unison. The soft echoes of his steps carried him back to the long table, where other scribes bent diligently over their own pages. Though the day's work was not yet finished, he felt certain that this folio, blessed by the counsel of a master, would pass forward into the next stage, presentation to the head scribe, ready to shine as an exemplar of faithful care and learned devotion. And so, with measured calm, he set quill to inkpot once more, prepared to move on to the next line of text, ever watchful, ever patient, ever devoted to the slow art of preservation. In the hush of the medieval scriptorium, amidst the gentle flicker of candlelight and the steady rhythm of pens across parchment, the chant of words continued, each one a prayer, each correction a testament to the diligence of those who labored to safeguard the wisdom of ages. The room feels hushed when the head scribe enters, his robes whispering against the cold stone floor. A single lantern hangs overhead, its flame steady, its glow dancing softly upon rows of completed folios stacked at one side. You steady your breath as you lay the newest folio upon the lectern, draping its sloping wooden surface with a thin piece of deep blue cloth. The material muffles the dull thud of parchment against wood and offers a quiet dignity to the moment. Your fingertips brush the edge of the page, feeling its slight waviness where the hide was stretched and the vellum treated. You step back, heart thudding, and fold your hands in front of you. Across the room, the master scribe approaches with measured steps, his gait as practiced as the strokes he once laid upon these same sheets. His gaze moves first to the line of initials gilded just yesterday, noting how the gold catches what remains of pale afternoon light. He stands for a moment in silence, leaning forward to examine the spacing between each column of text. The hush is complete, save for the soft rustle a candle makes when its wick shifts. Even the faint scratching of quills on sand-covered tables seems distant. He reaches out and touches the margin where you have penciled tiny guide marks in charcoal. Margins are true, he murmurs, voice low, but carrying the soft authority of someone who has reviewed hundreds of manuscripts. You bow your head slightly, grateful that your measuring yielded an even border all around. Without a word, he draws a slender bone folder from a pouch at his belt and lightly tests the crease of a corner, ensuring the parchment lies perfectly flat. A defect here could catch a brush or impede a quill. Continuing his survey, he lifts his gaze to the rubricated headings that mark the beginning of each psalm. The red pigment is vivid yet subdued, mixed carefully with egg white to ensure a gentle sheen rather than a garish glare. He reaches for a small notebook, tiny vellum slips sewn together, and jots down a single line of minuscule notation. You cannot read his shorthand, but you catch the word color in a flicking mark that resembles a quill. He glances up. The hue may darken when the page turns, risking confusion with the black letters. I suggest a trace of vermilion next time, blended more liberally. Your pulse quickens. You step forward and unpack your pigments, keeping your voice even. You ask whether the red in the capital D could stand a drop more liquid, to flow more smoothly into its curve. He nods, the candlelight glinting off the iron bands of the lectern. Yes, a slightly wetter mixture, he agrees, and allow a longer drying time before gilding. Only then will the metal adhere without lifting those fine edges. He taps the line of gold leaf at the opening initial, the metal still gleaming with promise. Then he turns his attention to the script itself. His eyes travel down each slender line until he spots a place where your spacing of the minims seems too tight. He taps the spot with a fingertip. Here. The M melds into the N under dim candles. A slight gap, just the width of a stylus point, will preserve clarity. He demonstrates, sliding the bone folder along the adjacent line to show the needed separation. You note the correction in your mind, a guiding measure you will apply to the next series of folios. Quietly, he watches as you lift your penknife from your belt. The slender blade is sharpened nightly to a perfect wedge. You place the folio back on your sloping desk, tilt the lamp to cast more light on the offending letters, and begin to scrape away the outer layer of pigment. Tiny curls of parchment flake away, falling like pale snow upon your desk. A quick brush clears them, and you're ready to quill again, dipping it into thick black ink. With deliberate care, you reform each letter, tracing it once more in steady, deliberate strokes. He remains beside you, observing, offering no further words until the last line is complete. Finally, he nods just slightly, a gesture of approval so subtle it might be missed by an untrained eye. You exhale, the tension in your shoulders ebbing away. He produces from beneath his tunic a scrap of vellum that bears the marks of countless revisions, his own practice sheet, and shows you how a particular flourish can balance the tail of your cue against the flow of the line below. You copy the subtle curl, feeling your hand grow more confident with each repetition. When at last the corrections are finished, the master scribe steps back. He smooths his robes and allows the candlelight to pass over his face, revealing a faint smile. You have done well, he says, voice calm yet warm. He reaches out and taps the lectern's edge, signaling that this folio may now join the others awaiting binding. You lower your head in thanks, lifting the page gently, folding the blue cloth over it once more. As he turns to depart, he lays a hand upon your shoulder. His grip is firm but friendly, a silent benediction on your labors. You pick up your quill, returning it to its holder, and watch him stride away, the lamplit corridor swallowing his silhouette. The hush returns to its former depth, but you are filled with a quiet sense of purpose. You tidy your desk, gather the scraps of parchment that served as your trial pages, and set them aside for tomorrow's review. A small bell rings, soft and distant, reminding you that the hour for evening prayer draws near. You pause at the threshold of the scriptorium, looking once more at the rows of manuscripts in neat stacks. Each folio carries the weight of your day's delicate toil, and each correction reflects the wisdom passed down from master to pupil. With a final glance, you close the heavy oak door, carrying in your mind the steady rhythm of quill on parchment and the steady words of guidance that will shape the manuscripts yet to come. Chapter 15. Late afternoon bell and reflection. A low, resonant bell sounded through the vaulted arches of the scriptorium as the sun dipped toward the western windows, sending long shafts of burnished light across the stone floor. For a moment the clatter of quill against parchment stilled, the subtle rasp of ink drying paused, and the tiny echoes of breath and shifting robes became the only sounds in the great chamber. The scribe, whose hands had worked steadily through the day from dawn's first glow, felt the familiar shiver of relief at the summons. It was the late afternoon call to pause, to set aside the pen, and to gather for a moment of whispered prayer. Gently, with a quiet sigh, the scribe laid the goose quill upon the blotting sheet, its iron gall ink dark and lustrous in the shallow well. Fingers brushed the carved pine desk rail, gathering the faint curl of shavings and flecks of pumice before wiping the surface clean with a soft cloth. Each stroke removed the tiny remnants of the morning's labor. The faint smears where letters had been corrected, the pricks of the ruling stylus that had guided the straight lines, and the pale patches where pigment had spattered in the haste of decoration. When the desk lay bare and smooth once more, the scribe straightened the folded parchment support and laid down the leather-bound exemplar before rising. The scriptorium fell into hushed silence, as though the stones themselves waited. The scribe gathered the smooth wooden stool set beneath the desk, and followed the narrow aisle between tall bookcases of rolled scrolls and bound manuscripts. Candle flames wavered in their sconces, flickering along the rough-hewn wall, and the air carried the mingled scents of beeswax, tallow, and the faint musky tang of vellum. Each step was measured and soft, the worn leather sandals leaving no print upon the cold flagstones. A single sheet of vellum clutched to the chest felt light enough to be carried on a breath. Passing beneath the rounded archway, the scribe joined two brothers at the far end of the cloister. They moved with the same deliberate slowness, their heads bowed, voices ready to rise in prayer but tempered by the hush of this late hour. The three walked toward the chapel door, its heavy oak panel carved with a simple cross. In the narrow corridor beyond, painted frescoes of saints and martyrs glimmered in half-light. The scribe paused to trace a finger along the hem of a monk's robe in one scene, imagining the steady devotion required to transcribe those very images onto parchment. Inside the small oratory, the air was stiller and cooler. A single lamp, suspended from an iron chain, cast a pool of pale light upon the stone altar. The brothers knelt upon simple mats of straw, their lips parting in synchronized breath as they began the familiar psalms. The scribe joined in the quiet devotion, Domini, exaudi oratium meum, inclina orum tuum ad me. The low chant echoed softly between the columns, weaving with the sound of one other lantern softly sighing as it burned. Fingers flexed, releasing the stiffness born of hours bent over the desk, and the scribe allowed the words of ancient supplication to wash away the strain of ink-soaked hands. For a dozen minutes they continued, voices rising and falling in measured cadence. Each verse carried the weight of centuries, echoes of monastic life that spanned distant lands and long-ago ages. The scribe felt time slow, each breath prolonging the peace that the bell had so skillfully summoned. When the final verse was spoken, the brothers sat in meditative silence, eyes fixed upon the small crucifix above the altar. The scribe closed weary eyes and felt the warmth of calm spread from chest to fingertips. At last, a final whisper of Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus drifted through the oratory, and with that the brothers rose. Their footsteps were sought as they retraced their path through the cloister, returning to the scriptorium where the last rays of light were fading. The scribe inhaled the familiar mixture of dust, vellum, and faint wood smoke that lingered in the great room. Candles flickered in their holders, some guttering in a slight evening draught that teased the flame. Back at the desk, the scribe retrieved the quill from its resting place and tested the point against a scrap of parchment. The nib responded with a crisp scratch, as eager for the final labors of the day as the hand that held it. Yet the mind was different now, less burdened by fatigue, more serene, touched by the quiet solace of prayer. The exemplar lay open once more, waiting for the next section of text to be given life upon the fresh folio. The scribe dipped the quill into the half-filled inkwell, watching the dark liquid gather like a small pool of midnight, and drew a single confident line to resume the script. In that moment time seemed suspended between bell and blossom of letters. The gentle sway of lanterns and the dull glow of setting sunlight mingled on the page, blessing each stroke with whispered continuity between prayer and practice. Though fatigue still whispered in the muscles of the wrist and the curve of the spine, the late afternoon interlude had rekindled a quieter energy, a soft determination to carry the work forward. And so the scribe sat alone once more, pen in hand, returning words and illuminations to the chain of memory that stretched across generations. The slow pace of the day yielded to this final stretch, where calm reflection merged with the careful discipline of the craft. With each letter inscribed, the scribe honored not only the sacred text, but also the sacred rhythm of work and rest, of labor and devotion that defined the life within these stony walls. Soon, another bell would toll for the evening office, but for now, in this gentle pocket of time, the scriptorium held its breath, and the scribe wrote on. A slender plume of smoke curls upward from the single remaining candle as you settle once more at the oaken bench. The soft orange glow bathes the stone walls in a trembling light, and the shadows of mullioned windows stretch across the floor like darkened tracery. Just moments ago you laid aside quill and ink, joined your brothers for the late afternoon bell, and allowed prayerful stillness to quiet a mind stirred by lines of sacred text. Now the hush of the scriptorium has claimed you again. You inhale the familiar scent of pumice parchment, of oil lamp fumes, mingling with cool evening air that slips in through the narrow glass. The day's toil weighs upon your shoulders, but the cloak of calm that prayer bestowed remains close and steady. Your right hand, ink-soaked and trembling, lingers above the page, fingers slightly curled as if still holding the invisible shape of the letter. A dull ache coils around your wrist and spreads outward to each knuckle. Slowly, deliberately, you free your wrist from its bent repose. First, you bend your hand forward, as though bowing toward the desk, then backward, palm facing the low ceiling. Each movement is cautious, no sudden jerk to tear the delicate muscle fibers made stiff by hours of holding quill and guiding it in measured strokes. The joints yield little at first, but a faint warmth blooms in your palm. You circle your wrist in small, cautious rotations, tracing invisible suns as your tendons stretch and whisper in relief. Next, you bring your fingertips together and splay them apart, as though miming a small flower opening in the dawn. Each finger unfurls in turn, the thumb, stout and resolute, the index, slender and precise, and so on through the middle, ring, and little finger, each stretching outward in sequence. This ritual, simple yet unhurried, verges on a prayerful gesture in its own right, a silent invocation of strength to sustain your hand through the paragraphs yet to be transcribed. You feel the gentle crackle of movement at each joint, the soft snap of ligaments loosening, and you allow yourself a moment of gratitude for this small but vital reprieve. When your hand feels pliant once more, you lean forward and pick up your quill. The inkwell sits before you, its dark surface inviting. You dip the nib, withdraw it, and pause, letting a single droplet collect at the tip. It hangs there for a heartbeat before falling, splitting on the parchment with a quiet finality. That faint tap completes the silent prelude. Your first letter of the next section appears, a slender lupin D that arcs like a bridge. The stroke is not as sharp as it had been at morning's first light. The line quivers slightly, yet it is still poised, still legible. You continue. Each word is formed with deliberate care, an E so small it might be mistaken for a mere flicker of ink, an M that rises and falls in three gentle humps, a U curved like a shallow bowl. Though your wrist protests with each motion, you marshal your focus to hold uniformity across the lines. The earlier passages you completed stand beside these new ones, each letter equal in height and width, each stroke consistent. You remind yourself that no slip of the quill may mar the sanctity of the text. The Psalter demands reverence as much in script as in silence. Time expands and contracts. A distant drip from the rooftop gutter echoes somewhere beyond the heavy door. The scriptorium's walls hold the sound in a soft cage, and you are aware of each drop, each tick of the wooden clock on the workshop's far wall. Beneath you, the bench creaks as you shift your weight, adjusting your posture to relieve the pressure on your lower back. The quill moves with renewed precision. You pause at the end of a line and lower your head to examine the guideline, drawn long ago with a stylus. The golden rule of symmetry binds you. Ink upon parchment, line upon line, letter upon letter. Your throat is parched. You set pen, quill knife, and inkwell aside in a small cluster. Next to them sits a wooden cup, its surface polished smooth by years of handling. You lift it carefully, mindful of the ink stains at its rim. The water inside is clear and cool, drawn earlier from the monastery's well. You tip the cup and let the liquid spill across your tongue, then swallow and let the moisture ease the dryness in your throat. You can almost taste the memory of well water, crisp and faintly mineral, carrying whispers of spring pastures and rain-softened stones. You pause to return the cup to its place, then press your fingers once more to the bench's edge, drawing yourself forward for the next stanza. As candlelight flickers, the page before you seems to breathe, the lines of ink coming alive in the steady glow. The words you inscribe speak of mercy and truth, themes you have lived today through work and prayer. With each letter you embody the devotion of countless scribes who have labored before. When fatigue tugs at your mind, you lift your gaze to the window's slender panes, glazed with ruddy dusk, and let yourself marvel at the ordered world outside, the quiet yard beyond the cloister, the rounded arches of the cloister walk, and the ancient yew standing sentinel in the cloister garden. This world, like your parchment, is built one measured piece at a time. Soon the news section stretches across the page, the text flowing from margin to margin in 4 neat columns. You sense the approach of a natural pause, a phrase that ends not in mid-sentence, but at the turn of a thought. The quill hovers there as if to wait a moment. You allow the hush of the scriptorium to fill your mind again, the distant murmur of the bell that will yet call you to Compline, the soft flicker of candle and lamp, the patina of centuries borne by these stones. You think ahead to the last review in tomorrow's light, where you will compare this folio against its exemplar one final time. Yet for this moment you only breathe and let your hand remain still above the page. The aches in your fingers have faded into soft whispers of memory. You feel steadiness returning, a quiet affirmation that the work endures. When you dip your quill into the ink again, the letter you form is itself a testament to perseverance. And so, with the patient rhythm of a monastic life, you continue through the next lines, letting the weight of the day settle into the solemn beauty of each handcrafted letter. The weary hand persists, and the sacred words expand, bringing closure to one section and preparing for the bearings of the chapters that lie ahead. The afternoon's last light has withdrawn from the narrow windows of the scriptorium, leaving only the gentle flicker of tallow candles and a solitary oil lamp to banish the gathering gloom. The scribe pauses halfway through the day's labors, eyes drifting from the half-finished line before him to the rows of luminous dots dancing along the walls. Each minute the flame wanes, and shadows deepen around the sturdy oak benches and the stacks of freshly ruled parchment resting on their wooden supports. Though weariness tugs at his shoulders and his fingers feel stiff from hours of tracing letters, he knows this brief interlude is not rest, but rather the threshold to the most exacting stage of labor, the final review and the gentle art of correction. He lifts his quill, now nearly spent of its sharpness, and lays it aside upon a folded scrap of parchment, careful not to disturb the small pool of ink that still glimmers in the inkwell. The parchment before him bears the day's work, lines of Latin verse, the script neat and even, each stroke flowing into the next with a steady rhythm. Yet even in this disciplined hand, a tiny blot of ink mars the curve of a minuscule letter, and a faint tremor in the wrist has left one stroke slightly too thick. He inhales the familiar scent of animal hide and soot, steadies his breathing, and begins the process of reading aloud in a voice so hushed that only the walls themselves could hear. Line by line he murmurs the words, pronouncing each syllable as if in prayer. In principio crevi Deocelum et terram, he whispers, tracing the outer edge of each letter with his gaze. The act of speaking softens his shoulders, thrusts the meaning of the text front and center, and it is through this gentle recitation that his eyes detect the subtlest errors. When a phrase flows cleanly from lips to parchment, he moves on. When a word falters under his tongue, he stops to lean closer. In this low monotone, the letters rise and fall like waves, and the scribe's ear, trained by countless hours of choir, guides his scrutiny. A sudden flicker of candlelight reveals a smudge halfway down the margin, an errant streak of ink that had seeped beneath the quill's nib. The scribe sets aside the spoken text and reaches for the slender razor-sharp knife, its handle worn smooth by years of careful sharpening. With deliberate care, he angles the blade against the parchment surface, scraping away the flawed mark as though shaving the edge of a fine stone. A tiny curl of parchment dust gathers under his knife, and he brushes it gently away with the back of his hand, careful not to mar the surrounding script. The once disfigured line now stands pristine, ready to receive the proper letter once more. Resuming his low chant, he navigates further down the page until the uneven stroke of a capital D catches his attention. Under the lamp's glow, he sees that the blue pigment of the decorated initial has dulled slightly at the top, as though moisture had drawn the color inward. From a small bone palette, he lifts a whisper-thin brush, made from the finest squirrel hair, and dips it into a fresh mixture of lapis lazuli powder and egg white. With the gentlest of touches, he retraces the outline of the letter, layering the ultramarine until it regains the deep celestial hue that matches the other initials. He sets the brush aside and blows softly to dry the paint, then lightly touches the letter's edge with a sliver of gold leaf to restore the faint glimmer that had softened under hours of daylight. More lines await. He moves steadily, his voice a quiet murmur echoing between the cool stones. Wherever a blotch or a slight imperfection appears, the knife comes forth, followed by the pumice stone he had used in the morning to smooth the new parchment. He sands the scraped area until it matches the book's surface, then lifts the dust with a soft cloth. The rhythm of scrape, smooth, blow, and write repeats itself with measured precision, each correction taking only a heartbeat but restoring the text's integrity. With every small gesture, the scribe feels closer to the sacred purpose of his craft, to present these words unblemished, unmarred by human fallibility. As the night deepens, he smooths his gaze across the margins to confirm that they all align perfectly with the faint ruling lines scored earlier. The overarching grid, once only a guiding skeleton, now frames a living tapestry of words and illumination. A single discrepancy, a word that climbs 2 letters too close to the margin's edge, beckons him again. He inspects the letter M that intrudes, breathes out softly, and lifts his penknife. A gentle scrape clears the way, and he rewrites a letter in a slightly smaller form. Instantly, the entire line feels balanced, breathing within its space as intended. The scribe's lamp gutters in the corner, yet he does not pause. His mind drifts, unhurried, to the monastery's quiet hallways and the rhythmic cadence of the bell that will soon call the brethren to Compline. He imagines the monks in their habits, filing into the chapel as one, voices rising in soft harmony. In such moments he often recalls that his work here is itself a wordless prayer, an offering of light and color to the weary eyes of future readers. When he corrects a smudge or refines an illuminated stroke, he feels that prayer taking shape. He reaches now for a small pot of vermilion, the pigment for the little florons and decorative dots that mark the ends of verses. In the dim glow, each dash of red must be placed with certainty. He pauses once more, reading his words aloud until he can hear, in the space between syllables, the exact point where a tiny flourish is needed. Guiding the brush as if by instinct, he lays down a precise drop of red at the margin's console, then lifts his head to appraise the flourish from a short distance. The touch is perfect, a small sunburst of color on parchment, as pale as moonlight. Finally, with nearly every line inspected, every smudge erased, every pigment refreshed, he lays aside blade and brush. There remains only one last task, to hold the folio up to the window's dark frame, near the point where a single candle flame still dances, and to take stock of the page in its entirety. Under this gentle contrast of shadow and light, the text seems to glow from within, the decorated initials shining like distant stars. He closes his eyes for a moment, feeling the wood beneath his fingertips and the papery grain of the vellum. In the silence, he offers a whispered prayer for clarity, for those who will one day read these lines and remember the hands that formed them. At length, he sets the manuscript down, straightens from his bench, and brushes his smock of ink-dusted wool. Outside, the monastery's night watch stirs, and distant footsteps roll down the corridor. The scribe glances once more at the page, complete, flawless, ready, and allows himself a single breath of quiet satisfaction. The final review is done. Soon he will tend the tools used today, stow away pigments and parchments, and step into the corridor to join his brethren in evening devotion. But in this calm moment, he lingers over the still-lit page, knowing that each careful stroke and every erased blemish will echo through time, preserving both word and artistry for generations yet to come. When the final ray of daylight slips beyond the narrow slit windows of the scriptorium, the day's labors draw quietly to a close. The parchment rests open on its wooden desk, the ink still faintly glistening in the dim glow of the remaining candles. The scribe, whose hands have borne the steady rhythm of writing from dawn until dusk, pauses before the array of instruments laid out upon a low bench. Here, at the edge of evening, begins the deliberate ritual of cleaning and preparing each tool for tomorrow's work. The first task is to attend to the brushes used in the gilding and illumination. Droplets of water lie in a shallow basin of carved stone, cool to the touch and scented faintly of moss. The scribe lifts a brush by its slender bone handle and dips the bristles into the water. Tiny motes of gold leaf and fine particles of pigment swirl free in the liquid. With a steady hand, the scribe strokes the bristles against the basin's smooth edge, coaxing out each microscopic shard. This motion is repeated. Immerse, stroke, rinse, until the water runs nearly clear. One by one, the brushes are cleansed of their vibrant hues: lapis lazuli's deep blue, the earthy green of malachite, the crimson of vermilion, and even the powdered gold that once caught the flicker of candlelight. After rinsing, each brush is lifted from the basin and set carefully upon a length of coarse linen cloth. The cloth has been laid out on a wooden plank, its fibers ready to draw out the water. The scribe arranges the brushes so that the bristles point away, fanning slightly, ensuring air will circulate around every filament. A soft pressing motion between two folds of cloth expels excess moisture without crushing the delicate tips. Then each brush is left to rest at the back of the scriptorium, propped upright in a small clay pot where a faint breeze drifting through the open doorway will finish the drying. Turning next to the quills, the scribe selects a handful of well-chosen goose feathers that have served through today's chapter. The quills lie in a simple wooden box beside a small leather pouch of finely ground pumice and a slender hand-forged penknife. With careful attention, the scribe grips the quill shaft near its base. The penknife's blade, honed to a sharp edge by the master artisan, glides along the quill's nib. Each motion peels away a sliver of hardened ink residue, reshaping the nib into its optimal form. The scribe tests the sharpness by lightly grazing the nib against a scrap of parchment. The blade must carve a crisp line, neither too deep nor too faint. Once satisfied, the scribe repeats the process for every quill provisioned for the next day's work, arranging them in order of thickness, some for broad, bold strokes, others for the finest filigree. Beside the quills, the ink dishes, small, shallow bowls of burnished clay, await attention. Their rims are stained by countless dips of a quill, edges encrusted with minute shards of dried oil and oak gall mixture. The scribe fills the basin again with cool water and uses a small bundle of soft fibers, taken from an old linen rag, to wipe each dish clean. The circular motion against the clay loosens grains of pigment, dissolving the dense black ink until the water becomes murky. Each dish is then rinsed under the basin's fresh flow, turned until its interior glimmers pale and unmarked. The dishes are placed upside down on a piece of folded felt, so that any lingering droplets can evaporate before the next use. On the low bench stands a small brass lamp, its reservoir half filled with nut oil. The scribe picks up the lamp and unscrews the metal cap, lifting it to inspect the wick. A slender wisp of cotton, soot darkened from its fires, is teased free and laid aside. The now exposed wick is trimmed, cut perfectly level, so that tomorrow's flame will burn evenly. A scrap of old parchment provides tinder as the scribe wipes the lamp's interior rim, clearing away any sticky residue. Next, the tarnished exterior is attended to with a soft cloth and a whisper-thin layer of fine polishing powder. The metal responds, brightening to reveal an almost silver sheen. When the polishing cloth has lifted every spot of grime, the cap is replaced, turned gently until its threads click into place. The final duty of the evening is to extinguish the remaining lights. The scribe carries a bell-shaped snuffer, its interior lined with a thick leather covering to clamp the flame without casting sparks. One by one, each tallow candle is approached, the corner sconce, the wall-mounted bracket, the desk's single stub. The snuffer is pressed flush against the flickering flame, breathing out with a soft hiss as the air inside fills with smoke. The wax lip cools instantly. A faint curl of smoke rises, rustling the parchment pages left open. Even the brass lamp is given a final breath of darkness. With the flames smothered, the scriptorium falls into an absolute hush. The faint scent of burnt wick mingles with the residue of oil and a lingering memory of fresh water. The scribe stands amidst the tools now clean and orderly, brushes propped upright, quills lined in perfect sequence, dishes gleaming, lamps polished, and feels the profound satisfaction of this humble ritual. It is the silence after creation, the calm that follows the act of giving form to words and images. In that stillness, the scribe allows the mind to wander over the day's efforts, the gentle sweep of quill across vellum, the shimmering of gold beneath candlelight, the colors ground and mixed by hand. Each tool, once soiled and worn, has been reanimated by these final tasks, ready to serve again. It is a meditation on continuity, the craftsman's vow to leave no mark of toil undone, no corner neglected. At last the scribe gathers the cloth rags and stray scraps of parchment, placing them into a woven basket by the door. A single oil lamp is left to light on a distant shelf, its glow a sentinel for any late stragglers or the morning's earliest comers. The door is closed gently against the chill of night, its oak sealed by a simple wooden bolt. Outside, crickets begin their steady chant, and the world beyond the scriptorium's walls settles into darkness. Inside, all instruments lie ready, each one cleaned and sharpened, awaiting the turning of another page in the unending story, the written word. Thus concludes the quiet ceremony of Chapter 18. The tools are at rest, the scribe's hand at ease, and the promise of tomorrow's careful labor hangs softly in the still air, a gentle echo of calm amidst the ever-flowing tide of ink and light. Even as the faint glow of dying embers lingered in the hearth, the scriptorium had taken on a hushed stillness. The head scribe moved from the long workbench to the low, sturdy chest lining the northern wall, each lid raised to receive the day's completed folios. The air was cool and carried the faint aroma of dried ink, pumice dust, and worn vellum. In this quiet moment, neither day nor night, the scribe lingered on each completed manuscript, as one might savor a final note in a long symphony. From the bench, the scrolls, unfolded by folio, were gathered in a neat stack. Each careful layering of parchment reminded the scribe of the hours spent over quill and ink, of the precise curves of every letter, and the bright pigments that had brought initials to life. Now, those same pages would rest until the binder's hands took them up for sewing and decoration. The first task was to secure each parchment bundle with cloth ties. The scribe lifted a length of soft linen ribbon, left over from repairing a torn colophon the previous week, and draped it across the top folio. With slow, deliberate fingers, the ribbon was wrapped twice around the stack, passing under the bottom sheets and back over the top. Pulling gently, the scribe tightened the tie until the folios settled firmly against one another, neither so loose that edges might warp, nor so tight as to dent the fine surface. A final knot, modest and unassuming, sealed the bundle. Once tied, each group of folios was assigned its own slip of parchment for a label. The scribe cut slender strips from the scraps saved earlier in the morning, irregular pieces of white vellum rejected for holes or blemishes. A quill was freshly trimmed, its nib keen and ready, and the ink freshly stirred. With a measured hand, the scribe wrote the title of the text, Psalmi Divitis or Antiphonarium, followed by the date and the number of folios included. The tiny letters were careful and clear, without flourish, that anyone opening the chest might read at a glance and know what lay within. The slips were slipped beneath the cloth ties, so that the bundle could be identified without untying. A final once-over ensured that the labels were straight and the ribbons lay flat. The scribe paused at each bundle, remembering the passages copied, lines of psalms, brief antiphons, marginal notations in Latin, and gently set the completed work aside on a low stool by the chests. When a set of bundles stood ready, the scribe approached the nearest wooden chest. The lid had been left slightly ajar to admit fresh air, preventing the parchment from acquiring must or mildew. The latch was simple, a slender strip of iron looped over a peg. The scribe raised the hinge, inhaled the familiar scent of wood and vellum, and slid the first bundle in, cloth tied downward so that the labeled edge faced upward. The stack settled quietly, each folio making the soft, whispering sound of paper touching paper. Soon the chest held 3 or 4 bundles, each neatly arrayed one atop the other. Care was taken to keep the spine edges aligned, so that when the chest was opened again, no sheet protruded or bent. With gentle pressure, the scribe flattened the lid down and guided the iron loop over the peg. The latch clicked into place, a small, firm sound that seemed to echo in the vaulted chamber. Lighting in the scriptorium had changed since morning. The tallow candles had burned low, and only a handful of oil lamps remained alight, their wicks trimmed and the oil topped off earlier in the day. Each lamp cast flickering shadows across the chests and work tables, lending a gentle golden warmth to the stone walls. In this subdued glow, the scribe moved back to the workbench, collected the next set of manuscripts, and repeated the ritual of tying, labeling, and storing. Between each action, the scribe allowed a moment to reflect on the cadence of the day's labor. How many goose quills had been trimmed? How many lines of script written? How many pigments ground and applied? Each folio represented a rhythm of motion repeated hundreds of times. The quill dipped, a line drawn. The brush dipped, a letter illuminated, the blade scraping away a mistake. Now all that remained was to ensure these labors were kept safe, preserved until the binder would next handle them. A distant toll of the monastery bell drifted through the thick walls, marking the approach of evening. The scribe paused, hand resting on the final chest, and listened to the low resonance. It reminded him that even the quiet task of storage and labeling formed part of a larger cycle. The manuscripts, once bound, would feed the minds of monks and scholars for years. They would be read at vigils and used in sermons. The careful securing of each sheet now ensured that this knowledge would endure. One by one, all the bundles made their way into the 4 chests, a tidy procession of tied parchment, each marked with a concise slip bearing its name and date. The scribe took a last look. No loose sheets, no stray fragments left behind. The benches were clear, the floor swept, the benches wiped down with cloth to remove any lingering dust. In the faint lamplight, the room seemed to stand in perfect readiness for the next day's work. Before leaving, the scribe retrieved a small iron key from the belt pouch and moved from chest to chest, fitting the key into each latch in turn. The key turned smoothly, and with a soft click the iron loop snapped into place. In the dim glow, the chests appeared to sleep, their precious contents secured. It was near dusk when the scribe stepped away from the wall of chests and turned toward the door. The final lamp was extinguished with a gentle breath, and the shutters were drawn against the chill. The quiet hush gave way to the sound of footsteps fading down the corridor as the scribe walked toward the prefect's chamber to return the key and collect the cloak hung on the peg. In those last moments, the scribe paused in the arched doorway. The scriptorium lay in silence, its labors safely stored, its tools put away, its worn wooden surfaces ready for the morrow. The parchment bundles, resting snugly in their chests, held within them the words and illuminations of a day's devotion. In the hush before departure, the scribe felt a profound gratitude for this measured work, the simple rites of tying and labeling, of latch and key. Each step, however small, was part of the living tradition of the scriptorium, a chain of careful hands preserving the written word for generations to come. Even as the last whispers of daylight slanted through narrow high windows, the scribe paused at his desk, hand resting upon the worn wood of the table. The chamber was hushed now, the once flickering lamps already guttering low, and only the soft ticking of time remained. He inhaled deeply, tasting the lingering scent of ink, parchment, and beeswax, a melange that had accompanied him from the first hour of dawn. His eyes drifted over the crowded folios stacked on the lectern, each sheet a testament to the long hours, patient fingers, and steady heart that had carried him through every meticulous stroke of the quill. With a measured breath, he reached for the slender taper still burning in its iron holder. His fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as if wary of disturbing the fragile hush that enveloped the scriptorium. Raising the quenching snuffers, he closed them around the flame. It collapsed instantly into a tiny spool of smoke, extinguished. He paused to watch the curling vapor rise toward the lofty ceiling, twisting in silent patterns before dissipating into shadow. Moment by moment, he made his way along the row of low tables where inkwells and brushes had been laid aside. At each lamp, he repeated the motion, cupped the snuffer about the wick, closed his eyes for a single heartbeat, then release. The glowing cores gave way to darkness one by one, until at last only a single lamp remained alight, a last sentinel of golden warmth. Even that he extinguished, mindful of the wax that would drip and harden overnight if left to flicker too long. At last the entire room lay in near complete blackness, save for the tiny pinprick of moonlight that had begun to seep through the shuttered panes. He rose from his bench, affording his stiff muscles a gentle stretch. From the back of his tunic to his waist, the leather apron that had protected his robes from ink and pigment lay stiff with dry droplets. Reaching behind him, he unfastened the straps and eased the weight free. As he folded the apron in even layers, the traces of spilt red and black ink formed mottled patterns, subtle echoes of the text he had labored upon. He draped the garment over a heavy nail beside the door, where it would hang through the night, ready for the dawn each day to come. In the muted gloom, he lifted the inkwell stand to the edge of his desk and turned it upright. The fine brushes, their bristles stiff from practice and pigment, were placed gently in their quern. The penknife lay atop the small wooden tray that held his spare quills. A soft sigh escaped him as he wiped his fingers on a rag, smearing away the last streaks of ink. This simple ritual of tidying his tools marked the end of one day's pursuit and the readiness to begin another. He paused before the shuttered window. With the turn of a simple wooden peg, the heavy bolt gave way. He swung the shutter inward and hesitated, eyes adjusting to the cool radiance of dusk. The courtyard beyond was serene. Cobblestones glistened faintly with early evening dew, and the deepening sky held one bright star already. A wind rustled through the cloister arches, carrying the distant echo of a bell, perhaps the curfew or a summons for the vesper hymn. Stepping across the sill, he leaned on the mullion and allowed the cloak of night to settle over his shoulders. The last glow of the western sky framed the outlines of gabled roofs and the tall spire of the Abbey church. Somewhere, a lantern moved slowly behind a shutter, maybe a novice tending the late task of illuminating a marginal gloss, retrieving a stray roll of vellum. The hush of evening seemed to deepen every sound, the clink of a wooden bucket drawn from the well, the faint drip of water from a stone gargoyle, the soft, measured footfalls of the night watch making its slow rounds. He let his thoughts drift back over the many hours he had spent within those walls. The dawn when he had first pushed open the heavy oak door and felt the cool, damp air drape itself about his shoulders. The gentle glow of tallow candles as they were lit one by one. The steady scrape of the pumice stone against fresh parchment, smoothing its rough grain until it was ready to receive letters. The measured lines scored by a stylist, guiding each perfectly even row of text. The rhythmic scratching of quill on vellum, punctuated by a soft humming of psalmody he might later join in the chapel. He remembered the mid-morning break when the bell had summoned him and his fellow brothers to pray, their voices rising and falling like one living tide within the cool, echoing nave. The simple sustenance of coarse bread and spiced ale afterward, shared in low voices while the sun warmed the narrow window-sill where they sat. Then the renewed purpose of returning to the desk, laden now with the exemplar and half-completed folio, each line a step closer to completion, each letter an offering of devotion. His mind floated over the gilding of initials, the burnish of gold leaf catching stray beams of light and turning them to pure radiance as though each page had been blessed with some tiny fragment of heaven. The meticulous cross-check of words and spellings, the soft addition of marginalia, and the final, exacting review by the head scribe. All these labors had woven themselves into the steady rhythm of his day, a tapestry of quiet purpose. Now, in the fading hush of evening, he felt again the gentle satisfaction that came from these unhurried tasks. In the plain, methodical work of copying a sacred text, there was solace. Each letter drawn was a small masterpiece of attention, each line a prayer in miniature, each page a testament to the faith that compelled such care. He drew his cloak more tightly about him and stepped down into the courtyard. The cold bite of night air brushed against his face, and a cluster of stars shimmered overhead. The moon, now a silver crescent, rose higher, pooling pale light on the cobbles. In the distance, low murmurs arose from the infirmary, a brother's cough, the tread of a caretaker delivering a draught of herbal tonic. Elsewhere, he could hear the plaintive cry of an owl, circling above the silent gardens. Slowly, he made his way along the covered walkway, each archway framing a small fold of twilight sky. Lanterns swung gently from iron hooks, their flames protected by horn panels. He did not hasten. His footfalls were soft as a whisper, matching the gentle tempo of the evening. In moments like this, every sound felt magnified yet tender, each breath, each echo, each flicker of distant lamp. Reaching the great oaken door that served as both entrance and exit to the monastic cloister, he paused once more. Beneath the lintel, the scriptorium lay behind him in silence, its windows dark rectangles against the stone. Ahead lay the path winding toward the communal dormitory, where his fellow scribes would soon gather for a final short prayer before rest. He crossed the threshold, laying his hand against the cool metal of the latch as though closing a sacred book. A hush filled his chest, a quiet contentment. Though the day had been long, each minute dense with tiny exacting motions, there was no weariness in his spirit. Instead, he felt the calm wash of fulfillment, as if every line he had written wove itself into the larger tapestry of the Abbey's life, its endless tradition of contemplation and craft. He stepped into the corridor, guided only by the glow of a distant lamp. His slow breathing set the measure for his steps. Ahead, a low chant drifted from the vesper choir. A few brothers gathered in the chapel, singing in low, reverent tones. He lingered at the doorway just long enough to let the melody settle upon his soul, then slipped away, the stone floor cool beneath his sandaled toes. Beyond the chapel door, the corridor branched left toward the dormitories. Along the plain walls hung simple icons and humble stations of the cross. At each, a small candle burn might still flicker, casting wavering halos of light upon painted wood. He passed without stopping. His place was set at home for the night, and the morrow would come soon enough. When at last he reached his narrow cell, a small chamber with a single pallet, a narrow shelf for his few personal books, and a low window looking out onto the moonlit courtyard, he paused to give thanks. Pulling aside the meager covering, he knelt, hands folded across his breast, head bowed. In the hush of stone and moonlight, he offered a final prayer of gratitude for the labor of hands and heart, for the gift of another day's work, and for the peace that comes with faithful service. Rising at last, he laid his cloak aside, loosened the girdle at his waist, and prepared to rest. Outside, the last murmurs of the choir faded into silence, and the hush of the night settled deep. He closed his eyes, and the lamp flame in his mind's eye danced once more across parchment, tracing each familiar letter, each illuminated initial, each ray of nocturnal gold. And as sleep gently claimed him, his thoughts wandered still to the empty pages that would welcome him come dawn, the fine vellum on which he would scribe new words, the steady hand that would guide the quill, the quiet joy of offering each letter to the service of faith and learning. In the heart of the night, under the patient watch of stars and stone, he rested at peace.